were these controls ignored by the Walz administration and by the Department of Human Services?
Absolutely. So we have many whistleblower reports talking about how DHS undermined ability to strengthen internal controls. So, for example, there was an effort for the Child Care Assistance Program. They have a clear and convincing evidence standard to disqualify someone from being a provider, where all the other programs are a lower standard, preponderance of the evidence. There was an effort to make this a lower standard so it was easier to disqualify people to preponderance. And the Minnesota Minority Child Care Association, which was run by a group of Somali providers, opposed it, and DHS went along with their recommendation. And in a similar vein, we were trying to reduce the number of child care employees with children that could work in these child care centers, because that was one of the vectors of fraud,
right.
And they opposed that.
So you had the Somali community who on purpose was petitioning the state of Minnesota to lower the standards to be able to make sure that fraud could not be caught. Is that correct?
Well, they wanted to keep the standard clear and convincing, which makes it harder to disqualify people.
So it makes it harder for them to be disqualified from wasting taxpayer funds. Is that
Absolutely.
correct? Okay. Ms. Robbins, I want to stay with you. I want to talk about use of funds. You've talked about some of these funds were used to buy property in Kenya.
Yes, sir.
Property in Turkey. Do I have that correct?
Yes.
Remittances back to Somalia.
Yes.
I think it's important for the committee to understand that these remittances, in part, are used in what's called the hawala. I want to make sure I have the terminology right. The hawala network. Ms. Robbins, can you speak to what the hawala network is?
Yes. So it's an informal network where someone goes to a hawala place in Minneapolis, which is like a money exchange or a money sending site, and they say, I want to send X amount of dollars. And then there's a receiving site in Somalia, and they put take the cash out. So money doesn't cross the border. It's an order for money here that gets transmitted to Somalia.
For the time, because I'm out of time, I want to expound. In Somalia and other parts in the Middle East region writ large, a hawala network is a bunch of money exchangers, hand to hand, not bank account to bank account.
Exactly.
And what is clear in Somalia and other parts is that Al-Shabaab, the largest Al-Qaeda affiliate in Somalia, they have their hands all through this network. So taxpayer money, United States dollars, that are being remitted into Somalia, in part, have been utilized or have fallen into the hands of Al-Shabaab. Do you think that's a correct assessment?
Yes, we have plenty of evidence of that, from money directly going to Al-Shabaab, but then also indirectly because they take a cut of whatever gets sent to Somalia.
Thank you so much. Chairman, I know I'm over. Thank you for the additional time.
Mr. Chair, I seek recognition for unanimous consent request.
Chair recognizes Ms. Presley.
I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a December 2025 article from the Minnesota Star Tribune titled, "Contrary to Trump's Claims, Somalis Add $8 billion to Minnesota's economy."
Without objection, so ordered. Chair recognizes Ro Khanna from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, fraud, waste, and abuse is not a partisan issue. FDR in 1932 with the New Deal railed against inefficiencies and fraud and waste in state and local government. I want to be clear. Many in the Democratic Party stand against the misappropriation or misuse of taxpayer dollars. The reality is, as a progressive Democrat, I believe the ultra-wealthy should pay more. But I want that money going for the health care, the child care, and the education of the American people. It offends me if there is waste or fraud in any of our states. That's why I called for people in my state of California to share stories of inefficiencies, fraud, or wasteful spending. I partnered with the All In podcast to advertise that we need to be responsible stewards of our tax dollars. And I believe we should be doing this for all 50 states. I challenge my colleagues on the Republican side. Let's have an audit of all 50 states to make sure that government money is being spent wisely. We don't need to make these partisan hearings. Every American has a stake in making sure that they have a receipt for where their tax dollars are going. Every American has a stake, if we're going to ask them to pay tax, to make sure that that money isn't being wasted. And I'd like to see this committee work together to stand up for basic fairness of the American taxpayers. I certainly am going to do that in the state of California, and we should be doing that in all 50 states. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Khanna. And I believe you're sincere, and we want to work with you on fraud in any state. If it's a Republican state, Democratic state, we don't care. The mission of this committee is to root out waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement, and we would gladly work with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
I have a UC request.
Proceed.
Thank you. First one is Arizona has recovered just 5% of taxpayer dollars lost in a $2.5 billion Medicaid fraud scheme.
Without objection, so ordered.
And I'll save the rest for the future. No, I've got a bunch more, but not right now, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Chair recognizes myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Yesterday, Minnesota's Office of the Legislative Auditor published an audit of the state's Department of Human Services Behavioral Health Administration grants. I'd like to enter that report and its cover letter into the record. Without objection, so ordered. The cover letter of this report states, quote, however, during the course of our audit, we identified a number of documents that the Behavioral Health Administration either backdated or created after our audit happened, end quote. It sounds like Governor Tim Walz's Department of Human Services may have been fabricating evidence by creating documentation after the fact to mislead voters, to mislead auditors. This new report noted that one grantee who received nearly $680,000 from this agency for 1 month's work, but could not provide any documentation or proof that any work was actually completed. What's more, and this is the kicker, the report notes that the grant manager who approved this money left the agency within days of approving the grant to take a job with the very same grantee that they approved money for. So very quickly, Representative Roberts, have you ever seen anything like this in your time as a member of the Minnesota's Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Policy Committee?
We have heard whistleblower reports of backdating and falsification before, and we also have a record of earlier in the CCAP, the child care fraud, where they would allow the providers to submit records far after the investigation and accept them as true. So clearly this has been a pattern at the agency, and it's unacceptable.
Unbelievable. And we want to work with you. We want to work with these whistleblowers. We're serious about this. The Trump administration's on the ground. We want to catch these people, and we want to put them behind bars, and we want to hold any politician that participated in these schemes accountable. Representative Hudson, who's to blame for this dysfunction?
Well, the blame can go around quite a bit, but as Tim Walz himself said, the buck stops with him.
Representative Robbins, do you have any examples of how the Walz administration blocked investigators from moving forward with high-priority fraud investigations?
Yes, we do, Mr. Chairman. I've met with whistleblowers and gotten documents from them about how after the original CCAP whistleblower report came out in March and April of 2019, subsequent to that, there was an Office of Inspector General within DHS that had investigative authority to do surveillance, warrants, and seize electronics, and they were shut down. They were told they could no longer do criminal investigations. They were told they could no longer meet with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension agents that were assigned to them without supervisor's approval. And instead, when they found one of the other members talked about how they changed the language. They went from calling it fraud to calling it overbilling. And they created an overbilling committee to all the investigative agents now couldn't do criminal investigations, and they had to flag issues of overbilling, and then a committee would decide if any of that overbilling would be recouped.
Committee appointed by Walz?
No, appointed within DHS.
Oh, appointed by the own bureaucracy.
Yes, so they shut down criminal investigations. They created a committee to call it overbilling and decide if overbilling investigations would even try to recoup the money.
This is evidence that Tim Walz interfered with investigators who knew there was fraud. The rumors of fraud have been taking place. I've been hearing them for a decade, and yet he interfered to try to obstruct their investigation of fraud.
Yes, his agency shut down criminal investigations.
Representative Hudson, we didn't get $9 billion stolen overnight. How did the fraud in Minnesota become so widespread?
Well, listen, let me give the maximum benefit of the doubt that these programs were designed for a beneficial legislative intent.
Of course.
The way that it happened was by when people recognized that the system wasn't working and they raised those concerns were ignored, and a culture suppressing raising those concerns was fostered by the Walz administration.
So obviously there was a lack of oversight by the Walz administration. Why would Governor Walz let $9 billion in fraud occur? Mr. Hudson.
In my opinion, because it was politically beneficial to Democrats. Again, the Somali community is a huge constituency group, and we've had some tight races in Minnesota, and it makes a difference for them.
Because it's a huge part of the Democrat voting base in Minnesota. Is that correct?
Correct.
Representative Varick, Governor Walz's announcement not to seek a third term seems to be an admission of guilt, I think, to most Americans, and an attempt by the Democrat establishment to cover up his role in the rampant fraud. He claims this is so he can focus on defending the people of Minnesota against criminals who prey on our generosity. As someone who has been in the Minnesota legislature longer than Tim Walz has been governor, can Governor Walz actually be trusted to defend Minnesotans when he allowed fraud to fester for his entire tenure as governor?
Mr. Chairman, if Governor Walz was serious about stopping fraud, he would have done it in 2019 when he took office. He has done nothing other than appoint commissioners that suppressed fraud and retaliated against their own employees.
And just think, this man was almost elected Vice President of the United States. This was the pick for the sitting Vice President of the United States to be the next Vice President of the United States. This is unbelievable. If people aren't held accountable, if people don't go to jail for this, this will continue, not just in Minnesota, but other states. And we're going to do everything we can on this committee to work with you all and every whistleblower in Minnesota and any other of the 49 states who wants to come forward to expose waste, fraud, and abuse. We're going to work with you and eliminate it and hold people accountable. Chair now recognizes Mr. Mfume. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a UC request.
Okay, go ahead.
First one is from the American Immigration Council. Immigrants contribute billions to federal and state taxes each year, as well as immigrants do not commit more crimes in the U.S. despite fear-mongering.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Mr. Mfume from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you and the ranking member for bringing us together on this today. I have a request for unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from James Clark, the Inspector General of the Minnesota Department of Human Services, directed to the Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee of the House of Representatives in Minnesota, requesting information on the alleged 700 tips that have been received. I'd like to enter that with unanimous consent, Mr. Chair.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chair, I know we're up against the clock. Many of us are trying to get to the special briefings on the action that has taken place in Venezuela, and so we are leaving one by one. I do want to try to get a couple of things in before I have to depart also. I want to thank you again. As ranking member of this committee's subcommittee on government operations, it has been my focus to combat waste, fraud, and abuse within the federal government for the last 3.5 years. Regardless of what side you're on, what side of the aisle, or what you believe, as has been stated, everybody should be against fraud. It requires our collective attention to address the issue and to minimize the consequences that we are seeing that are taking place. Not minimize the consequences to the perpetrators, but minimize the hurt to taxpayers in this country. As ranking member of that committee, we have committed ourselves to fight this full and necessary issue over and over again. And I believe that from most of the people I've heard, we all are concurrence that stealing from taxpayers is the wrong thing, period. Now, the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, and I, who is the chairman of that subcommittee, have been working together on a bipartisan basis to create a congressional scorecard to assess the progress of key government spending programs in reducing fraud and improper payments, both through the federal government and through states. Additionally, through the American Rescue Act plan, Congress has provided funding for PRAC, as well as the Pandemic Analytics Center of Excellence to deter, detect, and prevent fraud across multiple state agencies and multiple federal agencies. I've also co-led several bills here in the House that address that type of fraud. Congress should defend these programs that seek to find a way to root out this problem, and we need to do that in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way. The Council of Inspector Generals for Integrity and Efficiency, in their report a year and a half ago to the Congress and to the President, found that every dollar spent on the Office of Inspectors General, as a result, $26 was saved for every one that was spent. Now, that's a return on investment that taxpayers deserve, and unfortunately, the Trump administration illegally defunded CIGIE last year, and I've joined with my colleagues, several of whom on this committee, in leading several letters to oppose that unlawful set of firings of inspector generals. I urge this administration again and my colleagues to restore the congressionally designated funding to CIGIE and the offices of inspectors general so that we might be able to continue the work necessary to combat waste, fraud, and abuse. Before I yield, I want to thank Mr. O'Connor for his comments that this issue should be nonpartisan, that when we make it something other than that, we take away from our ability to bring about change, and we, in some sort of way, chip away at the sort of belief that the public has that we are really serious about doing something here. So it was concerning to me also to have heard some of the xenophobia that began earlier in this hearing, Mr. Chairman. Differences versus similarities. And when we do that, we create the problems that we always are trying to do away with. Asking witnesses to give their opinion of Somalis as a general group of Americans. Asking witnesses their opinion. Do you think they vote for Democrats? Do you think they just give money to Democrats? Asking their opinion. What is your opinion of Somalians? We might as well say, what is your opinion of Jews? What is your opinion of black people? What is your opinion of Latinos? That sort of thing, although it may sound good and play to the issue, creates a slippery slope. I want to caution people, a slippery slope. We heard earlier that of over 100,000 Somalis in this country, 87 were indicted in Minnesota. That comes out to 0.087%. Those sort of things create, I think, the disbelief that a lot of people have that we're about doing the business that we ought to do, and it gets back to the point that the gentleman from California raised, that we've got to find a way to keep this from being partisan and to keep it from being subjective. I would yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentlemen, you respect. Chair recognize Mr. Biggs before I go to Mr. Crane. Mr. Biggs, you have a UC?
Yes, sir. First one is Tim Waltz claims he fired people amid fraud scandals but won't name names. Next one, Waltz appointees failed to stop rampant Minnesota fraud. Next one, exclusive DHS insider claims systemic issues in addressing fraud. Next one, here's what the Trump administration is doing to crush Minnesota's fraud epidemic. Next one, Minnesota Fraud Committee Chair claims Waltz turned a blind eye to fraud warnings for years, and I'll yield back.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Grateful to have elected officials from Minnesota here today who can provide more intimate information regarding this mind-blowing fraud coming from the Somali community in Minnesota. According to Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, there is an estimated $9 billion or more in fraud. Many obviously believe that this is just the tip of the iceberg. I want to thank and acknowledge the independent reporters Nick Shirley and Dave Hawk who broke this story wide open. Today I'm introducing a bill to award Nick Shirley with the Congressional Medal for his explosive work in exposing astronomical fraud in Minnesota. And the reason I'm doing this is because the American people are sick and tired of this, and they're sick and tired of mainstream media not covering any of it. The biggest question that most Americans, however, have is this: is this incompetence at the executive level with the governor and attorney general? Are they involved and complicit? I'm going to start with you, Ms. Robbins.
Thank you, sir. My understanding is that they were certainly aware of the fraud and they did nothing to stop it. And there were plenty of opportunities. And their commissioners and their agencies also undermined efforts to tighten internal controls.
And according to Ms. Rarick, I believe you said that they were actually going after whistleblowers to suppress the expose of this fraud. Is that correct?
That is what the whistleblowers have said repeatedly.
Thank you. One thing that is so alarming is the reporting that many of these fraudulent companies are then donating the stolen money back to the same Democrats that are protecting them and advocate for these very programs. Is that correct, Mr. Hudson?
I would agree with that statement.
Well, we just had one of my Democrat colleagues said these are just opinions. Do you know, are these guys donating money back to Democrats?
Yes, they are.
I'd like to enter into the record, Mr. Chairman, an article from Breitbart News saying, with the title being Database Searches Show Somali Fraudsters Funding Democrat Politicians. So these aren't opinions.
Without objection.
There's actually reporting on this. Are you guys aware? You guys are elected officials in Minnesota, right? Are you guys aware of the reporting that some of the stolen money is getting funneled back to the Islamic terror group Al-Shabaab in Somalia? Mr. Robbins?
Yes, sir, and we have evidence of it going back as far as 2012, where a man was convicted of sending $21,000 to Al-Shabaab. In 2011, 2 Minnesota women were convicted of sending money to different groups. Someone else, we have multiple references of how the Al-Shabaab takes a cut when the money gets to Somalia through the hawala network. So I think there's ample evidence on this and federal convictions.
Yeah. That's outrageous. Obviously, one of the biggest reasons so many Americans are outraged by this massive exposure is because we generously and often foolishly allow immigrants and people into our country, and then they rob the American people blind while our debt skyrockets and the American people struggle to make ends meet. Are you guys hearing from your constituents the same outrage that I'm hearing from mine about this issue?
Minnesotans are fed up. Everywhere I go in the state, Minnesotans are so frustrated. As I said in my opening remarks, we are a highly taxed state, and they are angry that this much of their money, $9 billion, is being absconded by criminals.
Mr. Hudson, are you just hearing from Republicans on this, or are Democrat constituents like, oh my God, I'm struggling to put my kids in school, struggling to make ends meet, and my tax dollars are being robbed by people, and then they're sending it all over the place, and this is complete fraud. What is going on, and why hasn't anything been done about it?
I'll give you a personal example. So my family, my in-laws in particular, are politically diverse. A lot of them vote for Democrats, and they're fairly apolitical. They're not like me, all plugged in. And so I kind of use them as a bellwether for what the people are thinking. Across the board, everybody is upset about this fraud.
And I'm guessing when you guys bring this up, whether it's to the Walz administration, whether it's to the AG, the number one thing that comes back at you is you're a racist, you're a white supremacist, or you're an Islamophobe. As we've seen Governor Walz now trying to answer for these questions, he's doing it at the national level. Do you guys hear the same thing at the state level as well?
Yes, absolutely. They always pivot to the divisive, as I stated in my opening statement, it's diversion, right? We're going to talk about personalities, we're going to talk about partisan politics, we're going to find some way to get people yelling at each other rather than looking at the problem.
Or, like you've heard my colleagues do on this panel, it's Donald Trump, baby.
Yep.
It's all about Donald Trump, right? The old pivot. We're not going to talk about what's going on in Somalia and not going to talk about what's going on in Minnesota with this massive fraud scandal. We're going to talk about Donald Trump. With my remaining seconds, can we play the video I have, Mr. Chairman? Or did we run out of time?
We did run out of time, but can we put that in the record with that? Can we?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Okay, thank you. Representative Crane yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Stansberry from New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Happy New Year. Welcome to our guests. Thank you to our legislators for being here today and to our guests. You know, I come to these committee hearings, I'm ready to debate the topics. I'm grateful that you're bringing this case to our attention. Yes, we need to prosecute these crimes, period. Let's do that. And I'm also grateful to see that this committee is actually conducting a hearing that is in its jurisdiction, which is oversight over government fraud. But I do have to say, to my colleague's point that was just made, that I am surprised to see the focus given that the President of the United States and the administration are engaged in fraudulent behavior literally daily, including just a few days ago, invading a foreign country, using the United States military to take their oil and notifying oil and gas companies before the United States Congress, and the president claiming last night that he is personally going to control the oil and give government kickbacks to oil and gas companies. So why are we not investigating that? It definitely gives you the impression that there's a double standard in this country. I also want to say that I'm troubled to see that this hearing is being held in conjunction with an announcement that the administration made just yesterday that they were going to freeze $10 billion in federal funding for childcare and family assistance to 5 states across the country. And if you watched the president's crazy address yesterday, you heard him say it himself. But I want to say one thing, because my colleagues have pointed out all about weaponizing the government for political purposes. Well, these 5 states happen to have one thing in common. They all have Democratic governors and gubernatorial elections this year. Is this a coincidence? I don't think so, my friends. And this, of course, comes after weeks of viral videos from a young man YouTuber who was literally creeping around daycares by himself, making claims about fraud that were not there, and then the vice president and the FBI director were retweeting these videos without even verifying if they were true, unleashing a furor of anti-immigrant and anti-Somali hate across the country, wherein thousands of Somali people got targeted and harassed, including by the President of the United States, who literally used his platform as the President of the United States to call an entire community garbage. He literally said that. So we're not accusing people of being xenophobic and racist. They are being xenophobic and racist, including the President of the United States. And I want to say, for one, that I stand with the Somali and the immigrant community standing here today. But there's a bigger policy point here, which is that this is being used as a politically expedient moment to take away the immigration status of Somalis in the United States as part of the mass deportation plan of this administration. And it is also being used by the 2025ers in this administration to freeze critical programs that we know low-income families depend on, and which they call part of the woke agenda. This is part of a larger effort to defund these programs, as we are seeing across these 5 states. So I think it's important to pull back the curtain a little bit about what is actually going on in this hearing and its coordination with the administration, that this is about, 1, demonizing political opponents in Democratic states during a major election cycle. 2, it's about demonizing the immigrant community to support cruel and illegal mass deportation policies. And 3, it's about demonizing poor people and struggling families to justify taking away the basic programs that are helping them survive in this country. So I want to just close out by saying that I grew up in a low-income family. Many of you have heard my story before. But as I woke up to the news that the president was freezing child care funding to these 5 states, I had to think about the millions of families that would be impacted by it. I think about my own mom, a single mom, just barely struggling to get by, working multiple jobs. These programs are a lifeline. They make it possible for people like me to ultimately have a pathway to success. And you all are sitting here running legislation on shower heads while millions of Americans' health insurance is expiring, while millions of Americans can't even put food on the table right now. And you're over here parading around state officials, demonizing immigrants, talking about cutting basic programs, and you're passing legislation to redefine shower heads in Congress while the President of the United States is illegally invading foreign countries.
Order. Gentlelady's time's expired.
I find it appalling.
Order.
And
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes Dr. Fox from North Carolina. Oh, before Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have UC requests. First one, HHS freezes child care payments to Minnesota after massive fraud alleged. Next one, Minnesota's Quality Leering Center fixes sign at address still misspelled. Minnesota made it easier to get into daycare business. Trump's deputies freeze child care payments to Minnesota amid alleged Somali fraud. Jonathan Turley explains why feds can dig deep into Somali scammer special.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair recognizes Mr. Gill.
Got another UC request, an article from City Journal, quote, the largest funder of al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer.
Without objection, so ordered. And I believe, Mr. Fallon, you have a request?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record an article by the Center of American Experiment, Feeding Our Future, Keith Ellison, caught on tape.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Dr. Fox from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our witnesses for being here today. Representative Robbins, when Governor Walz testified before this committee last June, I reminded him that the fraud involving the nonprofit Feeding Our Future established Minnesota as ground zero for the largest COVID-19 fraud scheme in the nation. Feeding Our Future took $250 million in federal funds out of the mouths of hungry children, which amounts to $1,600 per child living in poverty in Minnesota. According to the FBI, the $250 million in federal taxpayer money was funneled, quote, into luxury homes, cars, and lavish lifestyles while families struggled, end quote. The FBI stated it, quote, will not allow criminals to rob federal programs and walk away unscathed. We'll expose their schemes, dismantle their networks, and ensure they face the full weight of justice, end quote. Last June, Governor Walz assured me that he, quote, wholeheartedly, end quote, supported the federal government's efforts to bring to justice those who stole federal taxpayer money at the expense of hungry children. If he had been true to his word, we would not be sitting here today. However, the committee's back today because the Feeding Our Future scam is just the tip of the iceberg of fraud in Minnesota and perhaps beyond. Representative Robbins, Democrats in your state have tried to dismiss your inquiry into the Feeding Our Future fraud as a partisan political exercise. Is exposing fraud and theft of taxpayer funds a partisan activity?
No, ma'am. As I said in our first committee hearing, it is nonpartisan. Everyone should want to protect taxpayers and vulnerable citizens.
And we completely agree. Representative Robbins, did Governor Walz work with you and your committee wholeheartedly to bring justice to those involved in the Feeding Our Future fraud?
No, ma'am. They have ignored the documents we have provided to them. We did a hearing in February of 2025 on child care fraud that was outlined in the Nick Shirley video, and we gave them a list of 72 child care providers that we were concerned about that got $1 million each or more. And as we saw in the Shirley video last month, they have done nothing about it.
Representative Hudson, for several years we've heard about whistleblowers, highlighted by some of us in Congress who noted instances of fraud in Minnesota. With this in mind, the recent allegations from Nick Shirley regarding staggering amounts of fraud involving child care centers come as no surprise. What kind of climate did Governor Walz create for whistleblowers?
Well, I think he did a really good job of demonstrating for us the kind of climate that he's created yesterday when in an unhinged rant, he tried to throw Deputy U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson under the bus, a guy who's been doing this for, I believe, 16 years. If he's willing to throw a Deputy U.S. Attorney under the bus, what do you think he's going to do to a state agency employee? That's the climate, and everybody who works for the Walz administration knows it.
Thank you. Representative Rarick, do you believe the Walz administration seriously pursued whistleblowers' reports of fraud?
I think that the Walz administration seriously retaliated against whistleblowers and ignored them and dismissed them. And, in my opening statement, I talked about the threats of firing them and blacklisting them and things like that. So that's what the Walz administration focused on.
Representative Rarick, innocent American taxpayers are collateral damage in the Democrats' reckless disregard for taxpayer funds. Hard-working Americans and their communities are left to pay the price. What lessons can other states and federal officials take from your work to expose the stunning amount of fraud and the network of those who enabled it that you all have exposed in Minnesota?
Yeah, the answer to that is very simple, and that is if you just do simple, basic good governance like reconciliation and a few other financial controls, you won't have the problems that you have here. And if you don't retaliate against your employees, your frontline workers that point out fraud, you won't have this problem either.
Representative Hudson, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, absolutely. You have to have a culture of good faith, and that is what is lacking in Minnesota. There is not a culture of good faith. And you see a very strange strategy going on right now with Minnesota Democrats, where every day they're denying this problem, which really strikes me as bizarre because we know there are more prosecutions coming. So what are they going to say as story after story drops, and we can cite time and date where they said it wasn't a problem?
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to note that it was the Education and Workforce Committee when I was chair that first brought this issue to the public's attention, and we got nowhere under a Democrat administration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Exactly correct. Thank you, Dr. Fox. Chair recognizes Ms. Summer Lee from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think like so many people on this committee have already articulated, nobody here believes that rooting out fraud and waste and abuse is not a top priority of this committee, of our caucus, of their conference. It is. If you're on this committee, it is the top charge that we all undertake incredibly seriously. But I think, like so many things with the modern Republican Party, it's like you're skulking right around the edge of things, but too often, your bigotry, the Republican Party's own bigotry, is imprisoning them and keeping them from ever actually doing something that helps, not harms, the American people. And this is another one of those instances, right? When it's a person of color, if it's 2 or 3, it's a pattern, and the entire community must be indicted. But if it's 100 Republicans, it's just not bad. Neither here nor there, because it's important. That's why we have routinely held hearings where we actually go over with the Government Accountability Office their high-risk list. We take it seriously. But the tone of this hearing seems to be a hypocritical witch hunt. It's hard to take it as anything but that, rather than an actual oversight effort. Our federal government currently has the tools to catch and prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. It's how the alleged fraud in Minnesota was caught by the Biden administration in the first place. Mr. Blue, as a former federal prosecutor, you're familiar with some of the tools that we have, correct?
Yes.
Just briefly, could you please verify the following tools for me? Yes or no? Does the Government Accountability Office work to reduce waste, fraud, and abuse?
Yes.
Do inspectors generals work towards these goals?
Absolutely.
What about the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency?
Yes.
Are whistleblowers important to rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse?
Absolutely.
Has the Trump administration helped or hurt these tools?
Certainly hurt it by disbanding the Council for Inspectors General and then ultimately firing 19 IGs.
Thank you. That's right. Again and again, Trump has attacked the oversight mechanisms within the federal government. He illegally fired 17 inspectors general and other key personnel. He goes after whistleblowers and he tries to roll back their protections. He routinely ignores the rampant corruption within his own administration. Republicans have turned a blind eye to all of this. They have held no hearings on these actions. And this hearing today isn't even about fraud generally within the federal benefits system, which we would welcome. Republicans have cherry-picked a blue state and an immigrant population, vulnerable, to demonize. To be clear, Minnesota is not the only state with a fraud problem. To truly tackle waste, fraud, and abuse, we need to approach the issue with a scalpel, not a mallet. Discovering that people are committing fraud in the federal program does not mean we should smash the whole thing and end it. It means its oversight mechanisms need to be improved. That's why it's so disappointing to see that the Minnesota House Fraud Prevention Committee that our witness, the Honorable Kristen Robbins, chairs, has issued no reports on these uncovered schemes. It hasn't advanced any legislation to address the issue or even shared whistleblower reports with their Democratic colleagues. They've just held a bunch of hearings and generated headlines, something our committee is all too familiar with. This hearing is not an effort by Republicans to improve social service programs. It's an excuse to end them and to punish Democratic-led states. This has always been the plan. It's why a Republican so-called big, beautiful bill is estimated to cut more than $1 trillion from Medicaid and CHIP benefits and cut SNAP for 40 million people, the very children or folks with disabilities who were mentioned in the opening statements. Trump has also already taken advantage of the situation in Minnesota. After a YouTuber harassed and posted unsubstantiated claims of fraud against child care centers, HHS froze child care funding to Minnesota, which would affect more than 23,000 children. Just yesterday, Trump also froze approximately $10 billion in funding for programs supporting child care, social services, grants, and cash assistance in not only Minnesota, but in other Democratic-led states of California, Colorado, New York, and Illinois. No matter what party we're elected to, we represent the people of our district, Democrat or Republican. We represent as the federal government all people of all states, irrespective of how they voted. That's the charge that I took, and I would like and hope that you all would do the same. When so many of these social service programs are being gutted and defunded, fraud becomes even more harmful, as that means even less money is going to people who need it. People need these programs. This situation should be an opportunity to take a deep look at the programs and improve their oversight abilities, not an excuse to cut them entirely. If we care about the most vulnerable, if we care about the most marginalized, this is an opportunity to do so, and I welcome us to actually do that one day. Thanks, I yield back.
Ms. Lee, the IGs are hired to identify fraud. They haven't identified fraud. The IGs have failed. But anyway.
You all have failed.
No,
you all continue to fail. We've done nothing. You've had the gavel, Mr. Comer. We barely do hearings on anything that actually affects change. You have power here, and yet you don't do anything. Yes, he actually initiated this, sir, but thank you so much for your opinion.
You have failed.
I yield it back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman, and I'd just like to point out to everybody that at this very moment, we're going to consider an appropriations bill that had an earmark in it for $1 million for another Somali-led organization whose family has ties and convictions to ISIS and fentanyl-related addiction. And I think it's very difficult to just, for all of us to determine what's legitimate and what's not. But I would just ask if the committee will play the video that Mr. Crane had referred to for me at this time.
Can you stop the, okay, go ahead.
We get the sound turned up. You can see the subtitles there. If you'll notice the campaign contribution at the bottom for $4,700, and then the $250 million fraud scheme associated with said individuals. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, it's not me calling out one community or another, one individual, representative or another. It's fraud. Representative Robbins, Hudson, and Rarick, thanks for your service. I know it's difficult, and you're operating in difficult circumstances where it doesn't sound like you got a lot of support. And I imagine that as Ms. Robbins, Representative Robbins, you're the chair of the Oversight Policy Committee. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I imagine at the state level you don't quite have the resources you need to track down all this stuff. This federal jury found that Feeding Our Future mastermind and co-defendant and also the contributor to one of your representatives from your state, one of our colleagues here, $4,700 for a $250 million pandemic fraud scheme. Like, you don't probably have the resources to find that kind of stuff. It's massive, right? And I suspect, as someone who, you serve at the pleasure of your constituents who want to see you elected and contribute to you, a $4,700 campaign contribution for a $250 million of, I guess, spending at the federal level is a pretty good investment for people. We're not here to pick on anybody, but I will tell you, I think the American people are particularly affronted when their goodwill is returned by stealing their hard-earned money. I just want to, if you can comment on that particular case, this feeding our future, and the fact that these folks pled guilty to $250 million, and then connections to the political operation in your state, which is dismantling your state.
Thank you, sir. Yes, so this is the big problem. There's a network of people who have been politically supporting the Democrats, who have also been contributing to them, and who have been involved in multiple schemes. So a woman who is in this child care group, the Minnesota Minority Child Care Association, Ikram Muhammad, she was later indicted in the Feeding Our Future scandal, as was her brother and her mother, and I believe a sister. And so it's a network that functions in our state that we have to get a handle on. And then one of the people indicted in that case for Feeding Our Future for money laundering $1.1 million, then they used that same company, shell company they did the money laundering with, to buy property for an assisted living facility after they were indicted. And then his wife has a company getting millions of dollars from the state to provide services to the assisted living facility bought by his shell company he's already been indicted for. They do not shut off the spigot.
So
that's the problem.
This is completely outrageous, obviously. I'm not an attorney. Are any one of you three attorneys? Are you? So,
yes, sir.
You said, Representative Robbins, that you informed the governor of these things. That's what you said, right? That's your testimony here today.
Yes, sir. I did a hearing on it, and I brought charts and laid out the roadmap.
So there are crimes of commission and crimes of omission. So if the governor didn't actively be involved in this fraud, that would be a crime of commission. But if he knew about it and didn't do anything about it, would you consider that a crime of omission?
Yes, sir.
And what should be done about crimes of omission regarding taxpayer funds?
So they should be prosecuted. And as you said, we don't have a lot of resources on our committee. As legislators, we don't have access to bank records, health records, the state payment system. So when we get credible allegations of fraud, we bring it to the U.S. Attorney and the Office of Legislative Auditor, because they can get access to those records and then bring the prosecutions criminally.
Thank you, Chair. I yield.
Mr. Chairman.
Before I go to Ms. Randall, Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs for UC.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number one, Washington Post calls for welfare reform after Minnesota fraud scandal. Exclusive, Treasury and House panel launch probes into Tim Walz's handling of $1 billion of food aid fraud. Additionally, referring to the earmark that Mr. Perry just referred to. Additionally, the Somali fraud scandal gave Trump a kill switch. What happens if he doesn't use it? Resurfaced video shows how Somali scammers use daycare centers to scam the state. Scrutinizing SNAP will help ensure the neediest get food stamps. Masterclass, A.G. Hamilton School's WAPO hack playing race card to defend Somali fraud ring in Minnesota. Tim Walz was brought down by a scandal hiding in plain sight. Unearthed surveillance video shows parents allegedly helping with fraud. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back without objection, so ordered. Gentleman yields back. Ms. Randall, a couple of our witnesses have requested bathroom breaks. I told them, the ranking member and I agreed, they can go and come back. We're going to keep the hearing going. If your questions were pertaining to one of them, we'll skip to someone else if that, do you want to go ahead? All right, Chair recognizes you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I have prepared some remarks that I definitely want to get to about the importance of childcare funding for all of us in all of our districts. I think we all recognize that we are in a childcare crisis. We have lost so many parents, especially women, from the workforce because they just cannot find adequate childcare. But I have to start by addressing some of what we have heard in this committee so far today. I didn't get myself together to ask any of my colleagues to yield to a question, so I'll ask you, and if you don't know the answer, it's okay, I do. What % of sexual assaults in the United States are committed by white men?
I do not know.
57%. Of the January 6th insurrectionists who were pardoned, do you know how many have been charged and convicted and arrested of additional crimes, including child sexual assault, kidnapping, production of child pornography, rape, conspiracy to murder an FBI agent, domestic violence by strangulation?
I do not have that information.
No, 33 since their pardons. Of the 21,504 murder offenders in the United States in 2023, do you know how many were white?
No.
8,842, which is 41%. Following the domestic extremist tracker that GEW compiles, since 2015, there have been 643 individuals charged, 447% found guilty. Do you know how many are men?
You tell me.
95%. We can trot out all of the data that we want to create the sense that there is a bad guy. There is a bad group of people. There are folks who are not among us. There are folks who are other. And I think we should spend a lot more time looking at ourselves, looking at American citizens, looking at white men who are committing violence at disproportionate rates in our country, who are committing crimes at disproportionate rates in our country, including the President of the United States, who is sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, as so many of my colleagues have pointed out. I also want to say, you know, I've heard a lot about the Somali donors to political campaigns. We all acknowledge, right, that you cannot donate to a political campaign in the United States unless you are an American citizen, right? I'm just going to, like, acknowledge that. You know who else is getting rich as a campaign donor? The expense of the U.S. taxpayers and because of the decisions that this government has made. Yes, Elon Musk, but also billionaire Paul Singer, a Trump donor who is getting rich off the military actions that this president engaged in Venezuela. Now about childcare. $7 for every $1 spent on childcare and early learning are returned to our U.S. economy. It's good for families, it's good for kids, it's good for our economic growth. But we are still facing a childcare crisis in this country. Chair Robbins, I understand that you have 3 kids and that they were enrolled in daycare at one point before you became a stay-at-home mom. What would your reaction be to an unknown, potentially armed, angry individual showing up at your home with a camera, demanding to enter while your children were at home?
So we used a neighbor to do our childcare.
What if they showed up at your neighbor's house?
Yes, I don't think they would be coming in. But
Yeah, how
honestly,
would you feel about it if someone who was armed and angry showed up in the house where your children were?
I'm not sure I understand who was armed. What are you asking about?
Thank you. I imagine you'd be scared. I think many families would be scared if that happens to you. I want to share a story of a provider from Washington State who said, following these fraud claims and the demonization of Somali Americans and child care providers. 3 adults came into her home and banged on her door, startling the children in her care. The children were frightened and confused. She's been receiving repeated death threats by phone and voicemail. Individuals have returned multiple times, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, parking outside the home and monitoring activity. They recorded families arriving and leaving. As a result, families felt unsafe and some withdrew their children from care. A nearby provider closed their program entirely due to fear. Another provider shared that she was approached by a man with a gun outside her home who interrogated her about her child care program, and she is now too scared to step outside. Providers aren't answering the phone anymore because of all the threats, which means that parents aren't able to get in touch with staff regarding their children's care.
Mr. Chairman, order.
Gentlelady's time's expired. You went 30 seconds over.
Thank you. Thank you for your lenience, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Mr. Gosar from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses for traveling. Now, Ms. Robbins, the Minnesota legislature led by your committee sounded the alarm on the fraud for years, but it's been ignored by Governor Walz. Did Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, was he aware of this?
Yes, he was aware of the fraud, and he came before our committee, and I feel like he did not do his job prosecuting these cases. Most of the cases have been prosecuted federally by the U.S. Attorney, both under President Biden and Feeding Our Future and currently under President Trump.
So he's, in your state, is the top attorney for the public, right?
Yes.
For the public. That's kind of I find it very interesting. Well, maybe it has to do something with campaign contributions. Attorney General Ellison and his son received from members of the leading Feeding Our Future, an organization now under investigation. The same group whose members allegedly tried to bribe jurors, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence. Nothing to see here. Sounds very familiar. Sounds very Biden crime syndicated-esque. Now, when you're talking about the tools that you could use, would any NGO that takes federal funding be of value to you, that they would have to disclose all their federal funding or all their funding mechanisms if they took 1 penny from the federal government?
Yes, one of the things we've seen in Minnesota is that some of these nonprofits have had their federal 501c3 status revoked, but the state continues to fund it.
It's interesting you say that because, you know, the IRS actually does this study, actually has those numbers, but when we order it, it's blanked out. It's redacted. All of it's redacted. I wonder if there's some interesting aspects to that, you know, follow the money trail. Now, Representative Hudson, the head of Feeding Our Futures was sentenced in November for his role in the largest COVID fraud scheme in U.S. history, according to the DOJ. This is a predictable result of the massive COVID spending with little or no oversight. In fact, we spent between $4.3 and $7.5 trillion during COVID, and we don't have a single receipt, not one, okay? Now, this is a predictable outcome from the massive spending. Whether it's expanded COVID tax credits under the so-called Affordable Care Act or the programs like the massive or Minnesota HHS initiative with a no enrollment cap. Unfortunately, there are plenty of similar federal programs right here in Washington, D.C. My question for you is, in your experience, what failures make government funding streams particularly susceptible to fraud?
Well, as I outlined in my opening statement and my written testimony, basically we're spending far more money than we have the operational capacity to monitor. Like they're just, now Deputy U.S. Attorney, he was U.S. Attorney at the time, Joe Thompson, said, we can't prosecute our way out of this. That's another way of saying it. We have to have controls on the front end.
Well, and with the massive amounts like I just talked to you about in COVID, you know, it actually, it gives the environment for fraud. It just builds on it, right?
Correct.
Well, Ms. Rhetoric, what concrete actions did the Walz administration take to intimidate whistleblowers into silence?
So I think the first thing he did was he put in place commissioners. Right now we have a deputy commissioner over Department of Human Services that is known to whistleblowers as being like the queen of retaliation. So when you put somebody in charge that is known to retaliate, that's a problem. I would also note on your previous question about the COVID money, and we discovered in our committee that the auditor, so there was a bid for auditing the COVID money, and the auditor was known to be our Minnesota State Auditor, Blaha. So that's another Democrat within the whole fold of the Democrats in Walz as well.
Would it surprise you that we spent $13 trillion from Bill Clinton to Donald Trump in that span of time. $13 trillion with not a single receipt.
That is absolutely shocking. I used to do accounting, and that's deplorable. That's something that you should be in prison for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the United States has no obligation to tolerate guests who break our laws. And in this case, there seems like there's a whole bunch of them. And unfortunately, they were targeting one general area. And it's sad to me that we are always being screamed at about xenophobia, all this different type of phobias and racist, and yet the facts still stand. So, Mr. Chairman, I find it very interesting today's hearing, and I applaud you for doing it. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman now, our chair now recognizes
Chairman,
the lady from Texas, Ms. Jasmine Crockett.
Mr. Chairman, ma'am,
I'm sorry, Ms. Crockett. Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs.
I apologize for that.
That's right.
There's some more you see. Senator John Kennedy brings Somali fraud to the Senate floor. Viral videos, David says he filed complaint against Waltz over fraud allegations. Minnesota adds Medicaid fraud verification amid alleged $9 billion loss. Minnesota's Somali fraudsters paid for rich lifestyles with stolen money. What investigators still haven't asked about Minnesota's fraud, I hope to ask that. Trump deploys 2,000 federal agents to Minnesota. Venezuela's been dealt with. Somali scammers should be next. Beyond parody, Craigslist ad from a daycare center in Minneapolis seeks to hire 20 child actors. Dr. Oz orders full-scale federal audit of Minnesota Medicaid. Did you miss a story about alleged Medicaid fraud from a Somali-run health services provider in Maine? A YouTuber's follow-up video on Minnesota fraud is just as wild. HHS to close Biden-era loophole that lets states pay child care providers without counting attendance. Yield back.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Ms. Jasmine Crockett from Texas.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And for every witness that is here, thank you so much for your time and your attention. I just have one quick question. I have not been here the entire hearing, but I don't think this question has been posed for each of you, and we can start at the far end. Do you believe that all Somalis are engaged in fraud?
I do not, and I'd like to...
Okay, just yes or no. Next.
Of course not.
Oh, absolutely not. We have good Somali people in our state.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to make sure I level set because it seems like we want to continue to, especially as we just heard those particular articles entered into the record, we want to continue to just make it seem as if you are Somali, then somehow you are a fraudster. And this administration has decided that it wants a target on their backs. And so when my colleague, Ms. Randall, decided that she wanted to talk about the threats that are being made towards various Somali people, the reason she brought it up is because this particular side of the aisle has a tendency of if one person does something bad, especially if they are an immigrant, then we are going to cast aside that entire community. So I wanted to level set, and I appreciate your honesty because that's something that we very rarely get from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. In fact, if we want to talk about fraud, I got a lot of fraud that we're going to talk about because we're going to get into this, but I am very curious to hear. Let me ask you, Mr. Ballou, are you aware of allegations that $50,000 in taxpayer dollars have been given to someone that is currently sitting in this administration by the name of Tom Homan? Are you aware? Okay, that's a yes?
I am.
Okay. And last I checked, and correct me if I'm wrong if you have different information, but he was given that $50,000 in exchange for being able to provide contracts and kickbacks to people as soon as Trump was going to get into office. The DOJ was actually investigating this, but as soon as Trump got into office, last I checked, he actually said, go ahead and throw away that case.
So it was a Department of Justice investigation, and he accepted the money from an undercover FBI agent in cash.
Are you aware as to whether or not we ever got that $50,000 back?
I'm not.
Oh, okay. Are you aware as to whether or not this committee has decided to investigate that?
I'm not.
Are you aware as to whether or not any committee in Congress has decided to investigate the fact that we know that he took $50,000 from an undercover officer, and yet we still don't have that money, nor does he have any charges?
I'm not.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's get into it. We're living through the most corrupt presidential administration in American history, a $300 million ballroom, a $230 million payout from the Department of Justice because the president got his feelings hurt because he had to be investigated for being a criminal. Hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars spent at Trump-owned properties around the country, Trump-branded wine being sold at the Coast Guard exchanges, American taxpayer dollars being spent on DHS propaganda ads on Truth Social, awarding federal contracts to corporations in exchange for campaign contributions. Kash Patel flew his girlfriend around the country on a multi-million-dollar jet that taxpayers paid for. Kristi Noem gave companies she's affiliated with hundreds of millions of tax dollars, then went out and spent another $200 million on 2 private jets for her travel. For 12 months, this administration has been taking billions of taxpayer dollars from American people and have been giving it away to their own companies in the form of tax cuts, government contracts, or other government-funded subsidies. So Congress has a role in getting rid of fraud, I will admit that, in any federally funded government program. However, I think the fraud that the American people are concerned about is that the Republicans are taking away Americans' health care so that ultra-billionaires can get more tax cuts. The real fraud is the dehumanization and demonization of the working class Americans and immigrants to distract folks away from corporate socialism that's happening because of the Republicans. So this is truly the definition of throwing away the baby with the bathwater. The Republican philosophy is that if the cost of living for the average American increases, they're on their own. But if the cost of doing business increases for the wealthiest people on earth, well, then it's the government job to bail them out. But I want to get to my last question because, Mr. Ballou, I got to give you a chance. He's been issuing pardons for numerous people who have defrauded the American people. And Republicans on this committee, yeah, just as quiet as the room just got, right? So, Mr. Ballou, talk to me about how the Trump administration has welcomed fraud across government by purging DOJ attorneys and shuttering ethics office across the federal government.
Well, you know, one of the things that's been a common theme in this discussion so far is potential government employee involvement in some of these schemes. That hasn't been proven yet, but it does seem to be alleged. The concern that I have is the office that would prosecute that in the Department of Justice, the Public Integrity Section, has been largely defunded and decimated.
Thank you so much. And my time has expired, but I do have some UCs, Mr. Chairman.
You want to do them now?
I do.
Okay.
The first one is from Truth Out. Trump grants clemency to executive who led $205 million Medicare fraud scheme.
Without objection, it's ordered.
The next one is Trump commutes sentence of Dr. Solomon Melgen, eye doctor, found guilty of Medicare fraud.
Without objection, it's ordered.
The next one, healthcare fraudster Philip Esfermaze is latest Trump clemency recipient to be arrested. He defrauded more than $1 billion from Medicare.
Without objection, it's ordered.
Trump pardons nursing home owner and supporter convicted of $7 million in tax evasion.
Without objection, it's ordered.
Trump
and we'll
pardons-
want all that stuff to put in the record. So,
I will. I got you. Trump pardons cost victims and taxpayers $1.3 billion, House Judiciary Committee Democrats review says.
All right, without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Mr. Biggs.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Chair
Mr.
recognizes Ms.
Chairman.
Mace. Chair recognizes
I have a request to be recognized to make a motion.
I'm sorry?
I have a request to be recognized to make a motion.
Yes, go ahead.
I move that the committee issue a subpoena to the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services for all records related to the immigration and naturalization of or any immigration benefit received by Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, Ahmed Abdi Salan Irsi, also known as Ahmed Aden, Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi, and any members of Ilhan Omar's family.
Okay, another motion is made. The committee will hold this motion in abeyance until the end of today's hearing. The committee will now proceed with today's hearing. Thank you, Ms. Mace. Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A report that came out yesterday indicates that on average, almost $1 million a day in cash is being sent from Minnesota out of the country by a small group of Somali carriers. Are any of you familiar with that on the panel?
I'm not familiar with that particular story, but that story has been in Minnesota for a long time, where millions of dollars has gone out of MSTPR airport in cash to Somalia.
Mr. Chairman, I ask that this be admitted as part of the
Without
record.
objection, so ordered.
Thank you. The Biden administration required states to pay health care and daycare providers before verifying any attendance at a daycare and before care was delivered.
That's fine.
Would you say that policy facilitated the funneling of funds or defrauding of government funds. We'll start with, we'll go down the panel. We'll start with Representative Robbins, please.
My understanding is that there weren't ever enough internal controls, but under Medicaid rules, the Walz administration already had the opportunity to stop payment when there were credible allegations of fraud. They had the opportunity to do prepayment review. They could do all of those things, and they did not use those tools.
Not only does paying people before they deliver a service introduce an obvious opportunity for people to abscond with public dollars, but we've heard these arguments in our communities back in Minnesota from Minnesota Democrats that it's just so important that we pay people up front because they can't afford to wait for the reimbursements.
Yeah, Ms. Rhetoric.
Yeah, this is absolutely counter to good accounting and good accountability. So I would definitely say that you should be providing the service and getting paid after.
Mr. Ballou, what do you think?
I can't speak to that policy only because I'm learning about it just now. But I will say, you know, my
so then the question then is, do you think it's a good idea to pay for the service up front before it's delivered and without accounting?
You know, I can only speak to the criminal side of things, not the administrative side. But my concern here, again, is to the extent that there would be violations because of that change, the office responsible for prosecuting those crimes.
Okay, so that's so you didn't want to answer the question. You want to filibuster. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. Now, here where we're going to go is one of the things that you mentioned, Representative Robbins, is physical facilities and real estate. And as we've seen and looked at this, as I've looked at this, all of the public reporting that's out there, looked at a little bit of Exhibit A, that's like 2,800 pages or 2,300, whatever it is. Didn't get to look at all of it, but looked at some of it. I want to know, did anybody go in and find out who's owning all these properties? Because you have basically vacant properties ostensibly holding themselves out to be daycare centers. Who owns those properties? Anybody look into that?
So some of our staff is looking at it currently, and I would encourage people to think about this as you look at your other states. So we have people who own the properties and then other people related to them or close to them that provide the services, and they both get remuneration. And then we have people who homestead assisted living facilities, small single-family homes, and say it's a business, but then they shouldn't be allowed to homestead. We have instances where there are multiple assisted living facilities that have been homesteaded. So the ownership of the properties and the ownership of the business is very important. This has gotten to be such a problem in Minnesota that people invest in the daycare business as an investment. And so getting not only who runs the facility, but who the ownership is critical, because that's where a lot of the money goes.
That's my point, is that you're setting up a series and facilitating straw man purchases of actual real property to actually launder or hide money coming from the state and defraud the state. And I would encourage both the feds and the state to really take a close look at that. I did find it interesting. Well, let me just ask the last question I've got time for here is, well, I got to ask two. The $18 billion, I'm saying $18 billion, that's the total nut over the last 5 years, if I understand your testimony right, Representative Hudson, and half of it was defrauded.
That is the estimate from the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Okay. Has the Walz administration put into place any new procedures since this has come to a very viral head in the last, 6 weeks?
They've appointed a couple of guys and shifted around a couple of chairs on the deck, but it's the equivalent of throwing a glass of water at a stove that's on fire.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have a few more UCs, if I may.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Victims shocked after Biden grants clemency to Kids for Cash judge and $54 million embezzler. Shocked. Biden clemency for convicted fraudsters met with outrage. It's a slap in the face. Comer on Fox News. Biden crime family pardons serve as a confession of their corruption. Biden pardons more people in his criminal clan and commutes sentence of Leonard Peltier. Op-ed from the former legislative auditor, Jim Nobles, what's the right number? And then finally, Mr. Chairman, 18 U.S. Code 666, theft or bribery concerning programs receiving federal funds seems apt in this case. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Presley from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just begin by making this plain. Credible fraud must be investigated and prevented. Every dollar that is stolen from public programs is a dollar that is taken from a child who needs care, a senior who needs food, or a family that is already struggling to make ends meet. Ms. Robbins, I want to just begin with a basic question, and please answer yes or no. When someone is convicted of defrauding the public, do you believe that they should be held accountable?
Yes.
So if we're serious about fraud, then we also have to be serious about accountability. Ms. Robbins, do you mind just expounding, what does accountability look like to you?
We want to prosecute everyone who's committed a crime, and we want to fire officials in the agencies that are liable for allowing the failure of internal controls.
Okay, so Ms. Robbins, let me be more clear. What should happen to fraudsters who steal public dollars?
They should go to jail.
So in my opinion, accountability means restitution. It means consequences, like incarceration, that help ensure that it doesn't happen again, as a real deterrent and accountability. It means that money taken from families and the public is returned to them. But that is not the standard that is being set by Donald Trump, who is wielding his clemency authority to allow fraudsters to escape accountability altogether. Last month, my office published a clemency report titled Trump's Clemency Gap, How Trump's Pardons Are Ignoring the People Who Need Them the Most. I ask unanimous consent to enter this into the record. Thank you. Now to the witnesses who serve in the Minnesota State Legislature on the Fraud Prevention Committee, let's walk through these pardons for fraudsters, and we all care about fraud. So Ms. Robbins, Mr. Hudson, and Ms. Rarick, Donald Trump pardoned George Santos, who defrauded voters and owed them $370,000 in restitution to victims. Raise your hand if you oppose this pardon. Thank you, Mr. Ballou.
Ma'am, I would have to look at the law and the facts of the case. We cannot know the facts of all these individual cases.
Don't deflect. This is a very public case. You know who George Santos is. You know exactly what he did. We just agreed that, fraud is unacceptable. And you just talked about accountability. You said if people commit fraud and exploit the public good, that they should be incarcerated. So this is not a complicated question. So I will give you all one more opportunity. Ms. Robbins, Mr. Hudson, and Ms. Rarick, raise your hand if you oppose the pardon of George Santos.
Not playing this game.
It's not a game. It's real life. It's not a game at all. Okay, but I will take your refusal to go on record, not only as cowardice, but that you do agree with that pardon of that fraudster. Moving on. Donald Trump also gave, and this has never been done before, presidential pardons to corporations that committed fraud. One example is the crypto company BitMEX that violated U.S. law and was fined $100 million. Now raise your hand if you oppose Trump's pardon of this crypto company.
Not participating.
Thank you, Mr. Ballou. Okay, again, I'll take your refusal to raise your hand in opposition. That means that you support this pardon of this corporation that frauded folks to the tune of $100 million.
Refusal to participate is not an expression.
Reclaiming my time.
To participate is not an expression one way or the other.
Do you know the rules of committee? This is my time.
I know that I am here as a member of the public.
Reclaiming my time. You are not, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
That's what I know.
You are not in order with the rules of the committee. This is my time. This is my time.
That's
I
our
ask the
dollars.
questions and you answer, but you're too much of a coward to answer. So we're going to move on. Now, yesterday was the 5-year anniversary, and I want to note of the January 6th insurrection. And on Donald Trump's first day in office, he pardoned 1,500 insurrectionists, including Brian Christopher Mock, who's from Minnesota. Are y'all going to say you don't know who that is? He's from Minnesota. Now, he kicked, shoved, and threw a flagpole at police officers, law enforcement that you claim to support. And he did all of that in the name of fraud. He was an election denier, so an election fraud lie. Now, he claims he did these things in the name of patriotism, but really he's just a criminal. So raise your hand if you oppose Trump's pardon of this Minnesota individual.
Ma'am, this grandstanding nonsense
This is not grandstanding.
exactly
This is
what
accountability.
Minnesotans hate about D.C.
This is accountability, and you are hypocrites. So again, I will take your
Thanks for
refusal to
demonstrating my opening
Mr.
statement.
Chairman,
reclaiming
order,
my
decorum.
time.
She's off the
Reclaiming
rails.
my time. I'm not off the rails, please.
You are
Enough
totally
with your
off the
tropes.
rails.
Nancy,
Order.
enough with your tropes. Give me
Order.
my time back.
Order, Mr. Chairman.
If Republicans were serious about reclaiming
by somebody who was supposed to serve me. You served me and my constituents.
You have no time left.
You
You're
don't get to
overtime.
accuse me of things in this chamber.
You're overtime.
You're out of
Order.
time. You're out of time.
There's no time
You're out of
left.
time. We're done here. We're
Out
done.
of touch and out of time.
At least 10
Mr. Chair, she's out of time.
Time's
Restore
expired.
time.
Out of order and
My
out of
time is
time.
Ms.
expired.
Presley,
You
you've
all are
already
very
secured your
unserious.
MSNBC spot tonight.
I'm
Now, your time's required.
looking for
Chair
accountability,
recognizes Ms.
and you
Mace
want to
from
You're
run
gonna be
from the
so
South
good on
Carolina.
MSNBC.
Chair
You're
recognizes
king.
Ms. Mace.
And this administration.
Thank you, Mr.
Chair
Chairman.
recognizes Ms.
And
Mace.
Mr. Chairman, I agree. She's
don't
going to be a
care
great
about
host on
hungry children. You wouldn't be
MSNBC.
cutting
This is
Medicaid.
my
I
time.
wouldn't want to jump
I
in front of
reclaim
Ms.
my
Mace if I
time.
were you, Ms.
I
Presley.
reclaim my time. This is my time.
I wouldn't want to interrupt Ms. Mace. It's her time. Chair recognizes Ms. Oh,
Mr. Chair,
You're out of order.
she did not get all of her time.
Mr. Chairman,
She wants to
still out of
insult us for
order.
10 more seconds.
What do
your
we have
time
to
is
do to
expired.
get this
Chair-
woman in order?
Her time is expired. Chair recognizes
You're
Ms.
going to
Mace.
be great on TV. You're really good. No, baby, you're not. No, baby, you're not. You are not in order. You're out of order. Goodbye. You're done.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, it's my
Chair
5
recognizes
minutes.
Ms. Mace, and
Are we
we're-
good here?
got
Mr.
it.
Chairman, thank you. As I listen to the witnesses answer questions today, I'm struck by the truly breathtaking amount of fraud, the scope and scale perpetrated against the American people by Somalians in Minnesota, screeching Democrats, like you just heard, at our witnesses. Democrats on this committee don't want to talk about Minnesota fraud because Minnesota fraud is Democrat fraud. You're going to make a great host on MSNBC. You're going to be great. And this is a cover-up. I mean, the very definition of cover-up. And so while we're still trying to understand the scale of the fraud, it appears that the amount of fraud we are talking about could exceed the size of GDP in Somalia, the size of its economy is what we're talking about. So let that sink in, the amount of fraud we're talking about. My first question is this, Mr. Balyu, this afternoon. Should Somalians in Minnesota be required to speak English, their citizens?
One,
Yes or no?
I'm here
Should they
for
be
the
required
legal-
to speak English if they're American citizens?
I think that question is really inappropriate.
Should they? It's not inappropriate. This is the United States of America. Do you speak English? Should Americans speak English? Citizens speak English? Yes or no?
Point of inquiry, is English the official language of the United States? It's a question I don't
Mr.
know.
Chairman, I'm being interrupted
That's
again
not a
by
valid
another.
parliamentary inquiry.
I would like to
Chair. Is
reclaim
that
my
a
time,
citizenship
Mr.
requirement?
Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reclaim my
she's-
time.
she's
that
asking
seems
the
to be a
witness.
popular
She's asking-
theme
Not a
today.
That's not a
She's asking-
valid
I
inquiry.
just- it's a
Stop
point of
the
inquiry.
clock.
Women
That's
have
not
a right to
valid
speak in
inquiry.
this
Finish my
committee.
point.
Conservative
She's
women have the right to
asking-
speak
she's
here
asking
and
the
not be
witness-
interrupted
Day
by
late,
my
dollar
male
short.
colleagues.
Ms. Presley's already got
Mr.
that
Chairman.
MSNBC slot.
I would
Chair
like to
recognizes
reclaim
Ms.
my
Mays.
time. I lost like 10 seconds there.
Okay, we'll give you 10 seconds.
Okay, my next question is, should Somalians who committed fraud be denaturalized and deported, Mr. Balyu?
Again,
Yes
I'm not
or
sure
no?
that's an appropriate question because the majority of Somali
So if you
Minnesotans
commit
are
fraud in
citizens.
this country and you are here from Somalia, you don't believe they should be denaturalized and deported. How
Again,
much fraud would it take for you to want to denaturalize and deport someone who committed fraud in this country? How much?
Again,
A
Ms.
billion?
Mays,
9 billion? 19 billion? What would it take for you?
most Somali Minnesotans are citizens.
Right. And the ones that committed fraud, the question was, if you understand English, should be those who committed fraud, should they be denaturalized and deported? The Somalians who are here, the ones that can't speak English.
Yeah, so under U.S. law.
Okay,
the
my next
basis-
question for
Excuse me,
you
Can I please finish the
is,
question?
no, you can't because you're not answering the question. My next question is, this is yes or no. If you marry your brother and you commit immigration fraud, should you be denaturalized and deported? If you
Again,
commit immigration fraud, yes or no?
Again, that question seems really inappropriate. And if I can get
Well, you
back to
can't
your
answer my question, so that's probably more inappropriate. Can you name one significant contribution to Minnesota from a Somali immigrant who can't speak English?
Absolutely, yes. But again, this is.
You didn't name one. All right, so my next questions are going to be for the Honorable Ms. Robbins. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. I heard some discussion earlier about al-Shabaab. and the discovery that you believe some of this money that was defrauded the U.S. government went to al-Shabaab. Is that correct? Did I hear that right?
Yes, it's been proven.
How much money are we talking about?
You know, we don't have an amount. So there's been specific cases where it's been charged where we have an amount, but then of the millions that go to Somali over the years in remittances, a portion of that we understand is taken as sort of a tax or corruption by al-Shabaab when it enters the country.
Can you explain to us who al-Shabaab is?
It's a terrorist organization in Somalia.
And they're affiliated with al-Qaeda, is that right?
My understanding is they are.
I am on the DNI website where it tells me that since 2014, al-Shabaab has killed more U.S. citizens than any other al-Qaeda affiliate. And as of 2025, al-Shabaab, this group is al-Qaeda. Affiliate. And as of 2025, al-Shabaab, this group is al-Qaeda's wealthiest component. Can you believe that?
Yes.
And that American tax dollars through Minnesota, through Governor Tim Walz, who shamefully had to resign from his reelection the other day, thank you to the young YouTuber Nick Shirley, this is the kind of thing that was happening in Minnesota. So I praise the Republicans who are here today from the Minnesota State Legislature exposing this fraud. And then, Ms. Robbins, when do you think Tim Walz became aware of the fraud?
I think he's been aware of it since the beginning. This was a huge issue in our state in the year he ran for governor, and the OLA reports came out, first identifying the child care fraud in March and April of 2019 when he was in the first months of his term.
Was Keith Ellison in on it too, knowledgeable, the Catholic turned Muslim guy in Minnesota?
Yes, they were all newly in office, and this was very public knowledge in Minnesota.
What role do you think Tim Walz and Keith Ellison played, his administration, in delaying investigations into the fraud?
So I've outlined several things where they stopped our ability to strengthen internal controls, and they also shut down the criminal investigations by the OIG and DHS.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. I do have two articles, Mr. Chairman, that I would like to ask unanimous consent. This one on foxnews.com, Minnesota fraud probe will expand to other states. And then on house.gov, legislators blast DHS for revelations it had contracts with feeding our future fraudsters.
Without objection to order, Chair somebody else seek recognition. Chair recognizes Ms. Ansari.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to start with the UC request, an article from the Washington Post titled, "Trump Amplifies Conspiracy Theories on Killing of Minnesota Lawmaker." As we know, the president shared a video.
Without objection to order.
Thank you. So I want to start with this question for the lawmakers here from Minnesota. As you know, Donald Trump has been posting these conspiracy theories about the linking Governor Walz to the killing of your former speaker and insinuating that Governor Walz had something to do with it. Can you please raise your hand if you think this is an appropriate action by the President of the United States? Raise your hand, please.
I'm not doing a raise your hand. I'm happy to comment on it.
Sure, is it appropriate for the president to do that?
So the person who murdered our colleague, Speaker Melissa Hortman, and her husband, Mark,
answer the question. Do you think it's appropriate for the president of the United States
evidence saying
to cause violence against a sitting governor
was ordering him to do it? I know the facts will come out in the case, and we need to be respectful of the Hortman family, and we need to let this play out in the courts.
That is unacceptable. It is inappropriate to the highest degree for the President of the United States to be sharing conspiracy theories that are obviously going to lead to violence directed at Governor Tim Walz. Now, moving on to the issue here today, we all care deeply about combating waste, fraud, preventing corruption, and holding bad actors accountable. Unfortunately, this country has seen an unprecedented avalanche of such abuse in the past year, all stemming from the Trump administration, the most corrupt and the most wasteful administration in American history. It is truly amazing that the majority moved so quickly to hold basically an emergency hearing on the situation in Minnesota without ever one time having held a hearing on the national crisis that is the Trump criminal enterprise being run out of the White House. I don't even know Where to begin? Maybe the Republican majority would be interested in holding a hearing on the $50,000 cash bribe that border czar Tom Homan received from FBI undercover agents in a kava bag. Or how about a hearing on the $400 million bribe that Donald Trump presented by multi-billion-dollar companies in the form of the White House ballroom that Donald Trump seems most obsessed with? Do Republicans have any interest in holding a hearing on that corruption scandal? Or the fraudsters and the criminals that Donald Trump has pardoned? He freed George Santos, convicted of theft of public funds. He pardoned Paul Walzak, convicted of millions of dollars in tax fraud after Walzak's mother raised money for Trump's campaign. He released the former president of Honduras, sentenced to 45 years for flooding the United States with oceans of cocaine. And these are just a few examples. I haven't even brought up Doge and Elon Musk corruptions, Trump's firing of inspectors general who are in place to root out fraud, and career U.S. attorneys who are doing the bidding of Donald Trump in prosecuting his personal and political enemies. Is there any interest in holding an oversight hearing on any of those issues? Now, I want to talk about one specifically appalling instance of blatant corruption in the Trump White House, reported by the New York Times, that the Republican majority has shown literally zero interest in investigating. This is regarding World Liberty Financial, the cryptocurrency company founded in 2024 by Eric Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Alex Witkoff, and Zach Witkoff, among others. If those names sound familiar, it is because the company is a joint project by the Trump and Witkoff families, Steve Witkoff being Trump's special envoy in the Middle East. You may think that the president's financial interest in a secretive cryptocurrency exchange may be bad enough, but it gets so much worse than that. Emirati investment firm MGX invested $2 billion in the Trump-Witkoff crypto business, personally enriching the sitting president of the United States, his family, and Witkoff as a White House employee. This is at the same time that Witkoff is an envoy to the Middle East. He's the one negotiating with the Emiratis as an official representative of the United States government. While Witkoff and his sons were negotiating this private crypto deal, Steve Witkoff was also in charge of negotiating with the very same officials as a U.S. official to give the Emiratis something they desperately wanted from us: highly advanced and specialized computer chips. To make the corruption even more explicit, just after the crypto deal went through, Donald Trump gave his go-ahead for the transfer of hundreds of thousands of advanced chips to the Emiratis, despite the extremely concerning national security implications. It's perhaps one of the largest and most obvious corruption schemes in U.S. history, implicating a foreign government paying off the President of the United States and the White House to the tune of literally billions of dollars in exchange for sensitive U.S. technologies. So please let the Republicans spare us with their feigned concerns about waste, fraud, and corruption. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Fallon from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We're here today in this hearing because there exists damning Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you. We're here today in this hearing because there exists damning and overwhelming evidence of massive industrial-scale fraud occurring in Minnesota right now, and it's been going on for years. This is a huge story, and while many want to ignore it, deflect from it, or be masters of obfuscation, which we have seen here today, this should be a page one, front and center, above-the-fold headline for media outlets across the country. But it's not, and I think it's very interesting. ABC, NBC, CBS, you can find 74 stories today run before you even get a hint of this scandal. This should be a headline, and unfortunately, it's a back page fine print. Still, as bad as the network's coverage, albeit it's ludicrously abysmal, it's better than CNN. This very morning, CNN ran 51 stories on its website, including such riveting breaking news articles such as dogs that are trained to sniff mold, a flock of gay sheep, K-pop's newest release entitled Demon Hunters, inside glimpse of P. Diddy Combs' prison cell, and Chinese robots playing soccer. but nary a mention of the tens of billions of dollars of American taxpayer money that's been stolen from honest folks in America by scumbag thieves. This is the Oversight Committee. We should have one overriding emotion, whether it's Republican or Democrat. We should all be outraged that crooks and thieves and dirtbags are robbing the American people. So I was very curious as to see how the Democrats would play today. Would they expose this fraud and be willing to work with us, or would they go to their playbook of Donald Trump bad? And when we were in Doge, it was Elon Musk and billionaires bad. And they didn't, they haven't really disappointed. January 6th as well has been mentioned. Has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. The ranking member's opening comments even bizarrely talked about presidential pardons. And he railed against POTUS. It's nothing to do with the matter at hand. But for the record, Joe Biden issued 250% more pardons and commutations than Donald Trump. In fact, 2,545 more. Again, back to the matter. This money's been stolen systemically by a gang of thieves while the very people charged with the oversight, namely the Waltz administration, have been complicit. They've looked the other way. And the Democrats didn't disappoint either with ists, isms, and phobes, quotes like bigotry and hatred, and we're hypocritical witch hunt. And then they were taking a hero, Nick Shirley, trying to make him a villain. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record an article, "It's Not Racist to Notice Somali Fraud."
Without objection, so ordered.
98 defendants that have been charged thus far in this case, and I think it'll end up being hundreds, 85 of them happen to be of Somalian descent. It's just a fact, despite how unfortunate and inconvenient these truths may be to leftists. The Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson thinks that this fraud can equivalent to maybe $9 billion. The entire federal budget of the country Somalia is $1.2 billion. Medicaid fraud does exist in all 50 states, but uncovering it aggressively clearly is not a blue state priority. If you talk to any expert, I was in the state legislature for 8 years, they will tell you objectively that no matter where it is, about 10 to 20% of all Medicaid spending is fraudulent. In the state of New York, they spent $96 billion. So did they recover in fraud $9.6 billion, $960 million? No, it was a pittance. It was 0.06% was recovered. In the state of Minnesota, $18 billion. It was 0.08% recovered. Representative Robbins and the other reps, thank you for coming. Thank you for your courage. You know you're going to be, smeared, and I'm not going to ask you, raise your hand. We're going to have a conversation, okay? When Ms. Robbins, Representative Robbins, when you first uncovered this tectonic fraud, what was the reaction and actions taken by the Waltz administration or Democratic colleagues? Was it working hand in hand to create synergy and offer full support and help to unmask this fraud, or did you face significant headwinds and fierce pushback to the point of opposition?
Throughout our hearings, they would either deny or deflect or say, oh, they've handled it, or they're new on the job and they don't know. So those were the answers in the tenor of our hearing. I provided documents to them outlining, as I said, in February of 72 child care centers I thought they should look at. They haven't done it. I've sent 6 FOIA requests or data requests that have not been responded to. So they have not been good partners in rooting this out.
So block votes in Minnesota in 2016, it was so close that I think Hillary Clinton won the state by about 44,000 votes. But if you have block 50,000 you can rely on in Minneapolis, that's rather helpful to win an election in Minnesota. But you know what, Mr. Chairman? Our Democratic colleagues, whether they be in Minnesota or here on this Oversight Committee, they'll eventually lure. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Bell from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member, and our witnesses for being here today. I believe in protecting our social services and recognize the need for comprehensive legislation that ensures transparency in the collection and use of federal funds to support these critical programs that serve our communities in need. The resources provided through social services ensure the welfare of the everyday person and family, and these resources and individuals deserve to be protected. These protections should come at all times, not just when politically beneficial. What we're witnessing from President Trump and this administration is an attempt to use social services and the welfare of the American people as pawns to promote their political agenda. Instead of caring for the challenges of the average person, this administration has deprived them of the very things that the president promised, which is affordable health care, housing, and relief from the rising cost of living. Through rolling back essential health care affordability, cutting funding for assistance programs, implementing harmful tariffs, and advancing legislation such as the One Big Ugly Bill, the administration's actions have ultimately caused more harm than good for the American people. Reports show that since taking office, President Trump has raised the average cost of living. Health insurance costs have risen by hundreds of dollars for the average person, with insurance plans increasing by more than 20%. Housing costs remain at an all-time high. And everyday grocery items show a steady increase, with prices rising by 15 to 20%. We cannot pick and choose when to care for the American people. The actions of this administration show a pattern. They first target our most vulnerable communities and then gut the very resources to help them. Today, it is our Somali communities and our child care assistance. Tomorrow, it could be your communities and the resources you and your family rely on for well-being. At its core, this is about the well-being of the American people. If we truly cared about those we have sworn to represent, we would be working to dismantle all the challenges they face, not just the ones that serve political interests. Mr. Baloo, President Trump has recently made comments on efforts to freeze child care funding in California, Colorado, Illinois, and New York. Would these actions benefit or harm children and families?
Oh, of course they're going to harm it.
President Trump has fired thousands of employees across critical departments and has issued Executive Order 14356, restricting agencies from filling vacant positions or creating new ones unless approved under the order or required by law. Can you speak to how these actions could harm the government's ability to root out waste, fraud, and abuse?
Absolutely. So, it's going to make it harder both to administer these services and then to identify fraud in the first place. One of the things that I'm particularly concerned about is to go after fraud. One of the easiest ways to do it is to prosecute tax crimes. The challenge that we've got right now is the administration has announced a plan to disband the tax division of the Department of Justice entirely. And that's going to make it much harder to prosecute these sorts of crimes.
And can you speak from your work as a federal prosecutor on how President Trump's actions have contradicted his promises to the American people?
Well, to the extent that this administration says that it cares about waste, fraud, and abuse, it seems like that is a selective care. You can look at cases like Paul Walzak, who was convicted of fraud and withheld $10 million to his own employees in nursing homes. His mother attended a $1 million plate fundraiser with the president, and Mr. Walzak was quickly pardoned. This has happened literally dozens of times where favored defendants either had their prosecutions dropped or were pardoned entirely.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Grofman from Wisconsin.
Sure. I'm sorry we had another briefing in the building, so I don't want to go over past things. But during your initial testimony, Ms. Rarick, you talked about people being threatened who are whistleblowers. Do you know who those people were? Were they like people who made money off of this, political operatives? Could you elaborate on that a little?
Yes, thank you. So the people that were doing the threatening were the supervisors and directors within the state agencies.
So state employees were physically threatening whistleblowers.
They were saying things like, what happens if you lose your home, right? Because if you lose your job, you lose your home. They had pictures in their personnel files of their own homes and their cars. They asked where their children went to school and where their bus stop was. So there was direct threats and indirect threats.
Okay. Were any of these people brought to justice, or this is just the way they deal with things in Minnesota?
You know, it's an interesting thing within the Walz administration. Those people were promoted.
He just defines evil, doesn't he? Almost Vice President of the United States. There's a good book out there called The Tragedy of American Compassion. And in it, they went over the history of welfare and whether it should be done. Feel that perhaps a motive for all the crookedness is, given the size of government today, the important who wins elections. Were they motivated a little bit by getting votes of groups of people? Is this a danger to we're not a democracy, of course, but is it a danger to our form of government?
So I'll answer really quickly, and then I'll pass it over to Representative Hudson. Just really quickly, the caveat to this, which is so bizarre in Minnesota, is the fact that state employees, by and large, are Democrats, and they vote Democrat. And the Walz administration, including Flanagan and his former chief of staff, Schmitter, were so brutal that these former Democrat employees want nothing to do with the Democrat Party anymore in Minnesota because they have been treated so horrifically.
What's so sinister about this is that you're right, that it absolutely is for electoral benefit and political benefit, but it's sold to one half of the population, and to the independents and to the conservatives, as we're giving people a hand up. We're going to help people who are in need. We're going to give them a temporary way back into working life. But they've set up an industry that's perpetual, where people just stay where they're at.
Right. So there's really an electoral incentive to make sure people don't get out of poverty. I'll give you another question. I used to be in the state legislature myself in Wisconsin, and I know that when we put together your budget, you have Fed funds, unlike money that, Wisconsin was getting in through our own income or sales tax. Insofar as the legislature is playing with Fed funds, you're not exactly as maybe careful with every dollar that's flowing through. And I'm trying to think what we can do to prevent this, because you're always going to have given political parties who think they can benefit from government largesse. And I think government by its nature is sometimes a little sloppy. Do you think the Minnesota government would be a little bit more careful here if on the various programs, and it varies from program to program, but if the state had to pick up 10 or 15 or 20 or 30% of the program so that they had skin in the game?
Thank you, sir. Yes, in a lot of these programs, the state does have skin in the game. So many of them, Minnesota roughly has a 50-50 Medicaid match. So many of them, it's federal tax dollars, but it's also state tax dollars. So we are paying for it twice, for our state tax dollars and then when we pay our federal.
I know, I think Wisconsin, when I was there, was about a 60-40 match with the feds picking up 60. And that came into play. But I gather there's some programs on here that maybe the state match is 0. Is that accurate?
I would have to look at each program. I don't know for sure.
Okay. I'll ask you, just as state legislators, and different state legislators look at this question differently. Do you think as a country on some of these programs, we should be asking, some of the programs that are 100% Fed funded now, we'd be better off if they were maybe 70% Fed funded or 75% Fed funded, so the states that have a little bit more of a skin in the game, I'll put it that way. And a concern I would have, insofar as there are programs which the state is picking up nothing, really the incentive is to have more graft, because you just bring in Fed funds for the state.
Yes, sir. So we need to make sure the states have skin in the game so that they administer the programs properly, because otherwise their incentive is to draw down more federal money to take the burden off state taxpayers. But we're all taxpayers, so somebody's paying. There's no such thing as a free lunch.
Right, and not just no such thing as a free lunch. It encourages state legislators to look the other way, because you're just bringing that money into the state. I kind of felt that way about Medicaid, but thanks.
I'm sorry, Glenn, gentlemen, time's expired on that.
Yeah.
Okay. Chair recognizes, who's next? Ms. Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a January 6, 2026 article from the New York Times, Health Department to freeze $10 billion in funding to 5 Democratic states.
Without objection to order.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate us having this conversation, and I do apologize to our witnesses. Being in the last briefing took us out of this space, but you coming here to provide us some opportunity to discuss this is important, because I think it is true. We have to recognize that fraud is fraud, and theft is theft. And anybody, and I say anyone, who takes away food out of the mouths of children, who denies child care to women, particularly young women, who are going to school and working and doing everything right, who need a little hand up. I don't know who in here has had to walk their baby to childcare and go to school full-time and work full-time as a young mom. I know I did. And I know that I received, but 27 years ago, child care stipends. So we can be mad at the criminals in every state, including your state, who took resources from children. But I also want to go back to the unanimous consent that I just talked about. I think we don't have to go too far back, maybe 2 days, to recognize that the President of the United States and the administration is halting billions of dollars now, billions of dollars to child care providers and centers around this country. In fact, I have a story that we just received in my office. We heard today that there needs to be accountability. But what about accountability to a young woman that we talked to today in our office who was told by her child care center, and she is going to school full-time at the local community college, that the President of the United States will be halting all funding, and within 6 weeks, she may not have an opportunity to continue her studies because guess what? There's a party in power that wants to punish the poor, not just in Democratic states, but all over the country. The reducing of SNAP benefits, the shocking taking away of resources from sick children, the halting, and I'll say it again, the stopping of clinical trials for sick babies. What we will do as Democrats is acknowledge that fraud is fraud. What we will not do is allow a conversation to go on to problematize immigrants in this country writ large. Can you imagine a society where we took the wrong of a small few and relegated that wrong to a whole community? Well, that's what we're doing here today, not just in Minnesota, but now accusing thousands and thousands of child care providers all over the country before they get their day in court, proposing that they, in fact, shouldn't be taking care of kids across the country. I think it's shocking. This story that I want to end my quick testimony with, Nancy Harvey, she's a child care provider in Oakland, California, where I represent a beautiful constituency. She's in my congressional district. Nancy has been a long-term child care provider, an advocate for early care and education for our babies, no matter who their parents vote for. Services that we know that are critical for every child, every child. Collective punishment is what the folks across the aisle want to do. We know it's wrong, it's reckless, and the Trump administration, we believe, must immediately reverse course so that families have access to vital federal funds that they are entitled to. Because you have a party that says they want everyone to work in this country. You want everyone to do their fair share. And yet, because we are so angry at a small few folks who, in fact, broke the law, that we want to create a collective punishment for all poor people, working families who are trying to do their best. I don't have any questions because they have been answered. This is a politic of cruelty. This is a politic of anti-family. This is a politic of anti-poverty. And for someone who grew up in poverty, I know how it feels when you wait and wait and wait to just get a chance to do better. And folks who've never met you, talk to you, believe in you or love you, are telling you you are not worth it. That is what this administration is doing to millions of children because of this halting of funding. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Higgins from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Robbins and Mr. Hudson, Ms. Rarick, you're all members of the Minnesota State Legislature, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Robbins, you're the chair of the Fraud Prevention Oversight Committee, is that correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Hudson and Ms. Rarick, you're members of that committee as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, so you three collectively, America should clearly understand you have an excellent perspective what's going on inside Minnesota, and specifically regards to the fraud that we are investigating and discussing today. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So we have a particular community, a Somali community in Minnesota that has stunning percentages are participating in government programs where they're drawing a lot of money, big money. This has been discussed and revealed and reported and is factual. You have a tremendous amount of criminal fraud taking place that one of my colleagues, the gentleman from the other side of the aisle, mentioned transparency. I would argue that from a regular American's perspective, it's quite transparent that something criminal is going on when you have billions of dollars disappearing into child care centers with no children in them, and you have a tremendous transfer of wealth into a relatively small immigrant community. You have $9 billion, that's $9,000 million missing in the last few years. It's alleged to be fraudulently stolen. They're sending money, the Somali community in Minnesota sending money, big money, overseas. They're contributing money, big money, to Democrat candidates and elected officials. The Democratic political machine in Minnesota has benefited from this criminal network of Somali immigrants who have systematically stolen billions of dollars of federal charitable money, essentially. The good lady, my colleague, clarified this is money designed for poor folk that need a hand up. And we generally want that to happen in America in an effective manner. So this is the scenario that we are looking into today. Have I summed it up fairly well? Ms. Robbins?
Yes, sir. And I would just like to add...
Before you add, Mr. Hudson, is this an effective summary, sir?
Yes, sir, it is.
Thank you, Ms. Rarick.
Yes.
Thank you. So from the perspective of members of the Fraud Investigative Committee of the Minnesota State Legislature, we have a large criminal network with high percentages of participation in that criminal network from the Somali community in Minnesota. That community has tremendous influence within the political arena, specifically within the Democrat political arena in Minnesota. The Democrat political machine has been covering for this criminal network, and here we go to Governor Walz's involvement here, which is shocking to me, quite frankly, because I've been friendly with Governor Walz for many years. I served with him here. But can you discuss for me the governor's administration's involvement in intimidation and oppression and retaliation against whistleblowers? Ms. Robbins, have you had conversations with whistleblowers who have been treated like that by the Waltz administration?
Yes, I have.
And can you tell us about that? Without naming the person or revealing stuff that's secret, tell us how that retaliation would happen.
So it happens in a variety of ways. They are demoted or reassigned, or they are told that they could lose their job and then their house or their pension or their retirement benefits or not qualify for unemployment. So it's...
Well, that's very serious. That's very serious allegation. I would say that's criminal retaliation. Mr. Hudson and Ms. Rarick, have you seen similar?
I would defer to Representative Rarick.
Yes, so Representative Robbins and once in a while Representative Hudson have had multiple conversations with whistleblowers, and that is exactly what they said to us, especially in a face-to-face meeting in St. Paul. That is exactly
Unbelievable.
what they said.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired, but this leans into the criminal spectrum, sir. I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Walkinshaw from Virginia.
I think I was here first.
They told me Walkinshaw.
And then,
I'm happy to
Walkinshaw.
defer.
Yeah.
thank you. And Mr. Min?
I'm just doing what the Democrat staff says. Walkinshaw's next.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just start with something simple. I think we're all agreed upon today. Fraud is real, fraud is wrong, and fraud should be prosecuted, period. And those who stole taxpayer dollars in Minnesota or anywhere else should face the full force of the law. But what we're seeing today, and the premise of this hearing, is selective outrage about fraud. Because if my Republican colleagues actually cared about stopping fraud, they would not be defending the one president in modern history who is systematically tearing down the institutions designed to prevent it. The one president in history who has pardoned fraudster after fraudster after fraudster. But Donald Trump didn't just pardon those convicted of fraud. He's gone after the people whose job it is to find fraud. He fired the independent inspector general at the State Department. He fired the independent inspector general of the intelligence community. He removed the acting inspector general at Health and Human Services in the middle of a pandemic as massive emergency funds were going out the door. He pushed out the Defense Department IG. And why has Trump gone after these independent inspectors general? Simple. In each case, they were investigating his or his administration's misconduct and fraud. Donald Trump's approach to fraud is to fire the referees and then say that the game is clean because no one blows the whistle. And he hasn't stopped with IGs. He's repeatedly attacked prosecutors, law enforcement, and career public servants who investigated misconduct that was politically inconvenient for him. He's turned oversight and fraud prevention into a Donald Trump loyalty test. That is not draining the swamp. So forgive me if I find it difficult to take seriously lectures about fraud from people who have cheered while the most corrupt president in modern history has dismantled protection after protection against fraud. You don't get to scream fraud on Tuesday after you fired the fraud investigators on Monday. We can protect taxpayers. We can root out corruption and fraud, but we can't do it by turning fraud into a political weapon and ignoring the record of the person who did more than anyone to weaken accountability. Representative Robbins, in Minnesota, the governor doesn't have authority to pardon independently. There's a board, I think, and the governor is a member of that board with the attorney general and some others. But if that board in Minnesota were to pardon individuals convicted of fraud, clearly convicted of fraud, do you think a pardon like that would damage your efforts to root out corruption and fraud in Minnesota?
It would really depend on the specifics of the facts of the case and the law, and
I'm not
going to comment on a hypothetical.
You're not going to say that pardoning fraudsters would make it harder to prevent fraud in Minnesota. You're not willing to say that today?
I want to root out fraud and corruption and make sure people are prosecuted.
You're not willing to say that. You're comfortable with fraudsters being pardoned. You don't think it would damage the work.
I want everyone who's committed a crime to be prosecuted and held accountable.
And pardoned?
It would depend on the case. I don't participate in the pardon process in Minnesota, but every case is very unique, and every governor and attorney general should look at the specifics.
Okay, Mr. Ballou, can you just talk us through, I know this has come up already, the firing of independent inspectors general, the intimidation of them, making it harder to do their jobs. How does that impact fraud prevention and the prosecution of fraud from the perspective of a former prosecutor?
One of the best investments that the government can make is in its inspectors general. Last year, IGs identified an estimated $50 billion in savings, either through duplicative programs or for specifically criminal fraud. The challenge that we have is with 19 IGs being fired, that work literally is not happening, and there's evidence to suggest that at least some of them have been fired specifically because they were going after enemies or allies of this administration.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a CNN article from February 11, 2025, USAID IG fired day after report critical of impacts of Trump administration's.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Mr. Burchett from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that it needs to be said that Governor Walz needs to step down. Him saying he will stay on to investigate is like O.J. Simpson saying he will investigate the murder of his ex-wife. Just doesn't work out. I have a question to the representatives, and thank y'all for being here. It's a tough gig. I did that for many years. Do you think that the Walz administration suppressed fraud and abuse in social service programs because they're afraid of exposing Somali residents? Just go down the line here. Yes, ma'am.
So not only do we think that's what happened, Mr. Burchett, but it is also what a Somali American investigator associated with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension said. He said in an article, fraudsters also have sought to exploit the burgeoning political power of the Somali community and the feckless fear that establishment politicians and state agencies show when confronted with charges of racism and Islamophobia. This is from a Somali federal prosecutor or investigator.
Sir?
Indeed, it's not just a theory. We have the record of the recording of Keith Ellison meeting with defendants in Defeating Our Future case, where it was very explicit that the motivation for keeping scrutiny off them was based on perceived racism.
Ma'am?
From the mouth of a whistleblower. You appear to be so this is what a whistleblower was told. You appear to be holding back these contracts because they are going to a diverse community. It's not a good look.
Okay. Do you think Somalians should be tied to these crimes should be deported, ma'am?
If they're not here legally, yes. If they are citizens, they should go through the criminal justice process. And then there might be other categories, but I would have to better understand.
I agree. So some of these, some of these folks are born here and then they're naturalized, so they would have the constitutional protection thereof. So yes, ma'am. Sir?
If there is any legal pathway to do so, absolutely.
Ma'am?
So you've got quite a big bucket of people, right? You've got people that were born here, that's a different situation. You have people that were naturalized, and then those are here illegally. So you have to treat each one completely separately with different paths.
Ma'am, who is helping these folks navigate this complex grant application process? It seems to me that it's orchestrated. There's surely got to go to. We've always found that out in my dealings with state government. There was always somebody in there, a gatekeeper.
Yes, my colleague Representative Hudson could speak to it. There is a sort of a cottage industry of Somali consultants who help this.
I bet there is. Yes, sir.
Yeah, as I said in my opening statement, I've personally talked to two gentlemen who have worked as consultants for multiple entities receiving government benefits. And they don't believe they're doing anything wrong, and by the letter of the law, they might be legally acting, but they have created an industry out of benefits that were intended to lift people up, not become a business.
Add to that, ma'am?
So that is something that we have heard repeatedly from whistleblowers and others, that there is, yes, I would call it a cottage industry of people that when you land on our soil, that they are going to teach you all the different ways to sign up for multiple social service programs. And there's also that. So they sign up for the max amount, which is probably why there's a report that just came out on December 13th of last year that says that 81% of Somalis were receiving some sort of welfare in Minnesota.
If you don't know the answer to this, just tell me. Do you have any knowledge or heard any talk that the Somalis are directing any of these funds to American U.S. tax dollars to al-Shabaab terrorist organization?
There have been past criminal convictions in this, and currently we believe it's mostly happening indirectly as they send money to Somalia that al-Shabaab takes a cut.
Y'all agree with that? We good with that? Do you think the design of the social service programs incentivizes fraud and abuse?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. When you are willing to hand over a sack of money to somebody on the assumption that they're going to provide a benevolent service and then you never check to see if they actually did, obviously you're going to invite fraud, waste, and abuse.
Ma'am.
Yeah, absolutely. We just stood up a new program that we'll probably talk about in a little bit, which is the Paid Family Leave Program. It was literally designed by Democrats to have waste, fraud, and abuse on a grand scale.
Okay, I'm going to be out of time. Mr. Chairman, thank you. But I think America, we're sick of the hearings. We're sick of all this. We need justice. We need convictions if these folks are guilty, and that needs to happen. America is sick of this, and it needs to happen. Thank y'all so much, and thank you for your bravery.
Very well said. Chair recognizes Mr. Subramanian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm so glad that committee Republicans finally want to talk about fraud and corruption and misuse of federal funds. This majority, though, has conveniently avoided this topic, but let's talk about the fraud in this administration. Let's start with President Trump accepting a $400 million plane as a gift from Qatar, which the president announced he would transfer afterwards to his presidential library, basically to himself. And then the president announced a $1 trillion economic agreement with Qatar and a security guarantee for them as well, an unprecedented one. Next, Trump has also accepted hundreds of millions of dollars in undisclosed amounts for his ballroom project, including from companies who had civil and potentially criminal charges that were then dropped against them by this administration. And it's not just President Trump. Secretary Kristi Noem has paid more than $200 million in DHS ad contracts last fall and bypassed the normal competitive bidding process to award some of the funds to a firm with deep ties to herself. And then Secretary Noem also spent $170 million of taxpayer dollars on new jets, including one for her own private travel. Family members of the president have entered into $2 billion in business deals with the UAE government and their government officials, while the U.S. Conveniently then signed a major CHIPS agreement with the UAE. And then after his election, President Trump put $4 billion in shares of his media company in a trust to be run by his son. And then President Trump maintained ownership of his business empire while letting his family run the day-to-day. And then in September, Forbes estimated that President Trump's meme coin tokens were worth $709 million, and his World Liberty financial tokens were worth more than $338 million, but we don't know exactly how that happened. Then President Trump also stopped the enforcement of foreign and bribery and fraud so that we could have American companies commit fraud abroad as well and not get prosecuted. President Trump also has made hundreds of visits to his own properties using taxpayer dollars, a lot of golfing included, and used his presidency for personal profit to those properties. And in 2019, the GAO reported a trip to Mar-a-Lago costs over $3 million. And so if you add that up, that's a lot of taxpayer money being misused and a lot of fraud. The interim U.S. attorney for D.C. ended prosecution of a January 6th defendant after he represented that defendant in private practice. President Trump pardoned fraudster Trevor Milton, a former CEO convicted of fraud in 2022, who, with the stroke of Trump's pen, escaped paying the $600 million in restitution that prosecutors argued he should pay to people who've invested in his company. According to to the Washington Post, at least 20 people who have received clemency from Trump were given forgiveness for financial penalties totaling tens of millions of dollars. And then President Trump pardoned Binance founder Changpeng Zhao, a money launderer, after getting support for a family crypto venture. And then President Trump also pardoned CEO Andrew Weidenhorn for stealing $47 million of his own money from his own company, but had his case dropped after he donated to the president. And then President Trump also pardoned the founder of the electric vehicle company Nikola, who was convicted of fraud and donated $1.8 million to political committees supporting President Trump. And prior to his confirmation, Secretary Hegset's wife owned thousands of dollars in defense stocks, including companies that contract with the DoD. And DoD Secretary Hegseth brought his wife, who has defense company investments, to meetings with foreign defense officials at a NATO gathering where Ukraine policy was discussed. And from recently passed funding legislation, U.S. senators can claim over $500,000 in taxpayer dollars over phone record collections during the January 6th investigation. We just commemorated the 5th anniversary of January 6th. And then border czar Tom Homan dodged FBI background checks and accepted $50,000 from undercover agents acting as business people in exchange for government contracts. The DOJ investigation of that was shut down by this administration. President Trump wrote on his social media platform, Truth Social, "This is a great time to buy DJT," less than 4 hours before lifting the tariffs he imposed days earlier, raising accusations of improprieties. I'd say the accusations are probably well-founded. President Trump's FBI director has reportedly used taxpayer dollars to escort his girlfriend's friend home from partying in Nashville. RFK Jr., the secretary, refused to fully cut ties to a vaccine lawsuit against a pharmaceutical company while serving as secretary, arrangement that profits from the suit would go to his son. Saudi-funded golf tournaments moved events to Trump golf courses, providing a financial windfall for President Trump and his family as his administration sets Middle East policy. FBI Director Kash Patel refused to divest from stock holdings in a company that controls a Chinese fast fashion firm accused of using forced labor and child labor, raising questions about the extent to which he'd enforce human trafficking laws. President Trump's God Bless the American Bible, which was a $3 production cost and $60 tag per copy, are printed in China. The Bible, however, is exempted from Trump's tariffs on China due to an exemption for religious materials. And I could keep going. Tom Krause, the CEO of Cloud Software, was hired to work on a payment system at the Treasury Department, raising questions about competitive advantages for future contracts. A Cloud Software subsidiary previously donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund. And the first directive issued by the U.S. Department of Energy Secretary Chris Wright focused on advancing geothermal energy, which benefits Fervo, in which his former company Liberty Energy had invested $10 million in. Commerce Secretary Lutnick.
Gentleman's time's expired, 40 seconds over, and I've been cutting members off.
I have more.
You have what?
I have more, but I'll yield back.
Okay. Chair recognizes, and you can submit anything you want to the record. We'll put it in there. Chair recognizes Ms. Boebert from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Representative Robbins, did your Fraud Prevention Committee raise formal concerns about suspected child care fraud to DHS or state leadership before federal indictments were issued?
So the original federal indictments came before I was elected back in 2015 or so, and then we thought DHS had cleaned it up, and they did not. So we did a hearing last February of 2025, and we provided them a list of child care facilities we thought they should check out. My understanding is they have not, and so we're hoping that they will take this seriously and go investigate with on-site visits what's going on in these child care facilities.
And when you raised awareness, were the governor, Governor Tim Walz, and the Attorney General made aware of these warnings?
Oh, I'm sure.
Did the state leadership fail to act promptly? I mean, it kind of sounds like they did if you still haven't received any information regarding these warnings.
Yes, we don't know that they took any action with the list we gave them.
And Representative Robbins, what recommendations from your committee were given and ignored?
So in general, we always try to look at internal controls, and we've asked, I mean, it's not complicated. We want them to go make sure recipients are eligible, that providers are eligible, that services are actually being provided. Our staff has gone to many of these places, And so it's not just the Nick Shirley video. Our staff has gone and looked at this, and there are literally no one there during business hours. Some of the offices where we have the address are empty. Like, there's no furniture. So they are not doing their job.
Thank you. Mr. Ballou, does the Department of Justice have more resources to uncover fraud than a 20-year-old YouTuber?
Yes, but those resources are declining.
Are they still more than a 20-year-old YouTuber with a cell phone camera?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the primary office that would be responsible for prosecuting public corruption, which is what is being alleged today, has essentially been decimated. Most of the attorneys have been fired or left.
Was it decimated when you were there? Was there funding there then?
Yeah, so
Yeah, it was there then. So why did the Department of Justice under the Biden administration ignore repeated attempts to uncover this massive fraudulent misuse of taxpayer dollars?
As you may recall, the indictment actually happened during the Biden administration.
And what action has been taken in the state to ensure that this isn't happening? Because we just saw dozens and dozens of centers that are receiving hundreds of millions of dollars collectively that are not functionally operational.
Yeah, well, in 2022, under the Biden administration, over 70 people were indicted for exactly this scheme.
So, Mr. Ballou, yes or no? A Medicaid program with low barriers to entry and minimal reimbursement requirements, that's something that would be highly vulnerable to fraud if oversight is weak, correct?
Exactly,
no?
and the challenge is that oversight
Thank you.
is
yes
being
or no?
cut further because
Thank you for your
the
answer.
tax-
Mr. Ballou, yes or no? When a program projected at $2.6 million explodes to over $100 million annually, that's a glaring red flag.
The problem that we have is that all the oversight at the federal level
Yes or
for
no?
this
Is that a red
being
flag
cut.
when a
The challenge-
$2.6 million program
The challenge that we
explodes to
have
over $100 million? Yes or
is
no?
the offices that
Yes
are
or no, sir?
responsible for identifying those red flags are being defunded.
Mr. Ballou, yes or no? When the same individuals or networks bill multiple Medicaid programs, that indicates organized fraud.
And the challenge that we have is
Yes
that
or
the
no? Does that
folks
indicate
handle-
fraud when you're getting the same individuals and networks that are billing multiple Medicaid programs?
Precisely the offices that would identify that are being defunded.
As they should be. Mr. Ballou, yes or no? Did the Biden administration cover this up for political reasons? Because uncovering fraud on this massive scale would have hurt the 2024 Democrat vice presidential candidate.
Just so I understand, are you saying that the offices that uncover fraud should be defunded?
I'm saying that these programs and the fraud that is taking place should be defunded.
My understanding is what you were just saying is that the fraud programs need
So
to be
no,
defunded.
we need to uncover these, but they're
And the challenge
these
that we
actual
have
programs
is that those
that are
offices are
ballooning
being
to
defunded.
$100 million. And if you could get back to the question I just asked, was this covered up because you thought it would hurt the 2024 Democrat vice presidential candidate?
The office
Governor
that would
Tim Walz.
investigate that kind
Yes or
of
no?
alleged public
Yes or
integrity
no?
fraud has been defunded.
In 2024, it was not defunded. And was this covered up to protect a vice presidential candidate? Yes or no, Mr. Ballou?
Prior to 2024, over 70 indictments were brought under the Biden
Mr. Ballou, was
administration.
this covered up to protect a political candidate?
Once again, that office has been defunded, and there are
Thank you,
over
Mr.
70
Blue.
indictments brought
I'm sorry
under
that
the
you're
Biden
not answering
administration.
questions before this committee correctly. Thank you.
And who's next? Okay. Thank you. Chair now recognizes Ms. Tlaib from Michigan.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all so much for being here. I think as someone who served in the State House, I know how important it is, no matter if there's a D or R next to any name of anybody that's in charge, to make sure we root out any sort of fraud, scams, because we know it hurts everyone. But as a Muslim American, I got to ask you all as a public servant, because, Representative Robbins, Hudson, Rhetoric, do you believe every Somali in Minnesota is engaged in fraud right now? Yes or no? You can start.
No.
No.
Absolutely not.
Do you believe that Muslims are demons?
No.
No.
Absolutely not. That's a ridiculous thing to even say. I hope nobody says that.
Yeah. Well, I just think it's really important, as you all do the job that you need to do, to also root out hate and divisive language that put, you can't imagine a child listening to that. You know what I mean? And they're seeing that. And I'm telling you, as somebody that grew up Muslim in America, sometimes you're just listening to that and you feel othered. You feel like you're less than, that maybe the things that are being said are true. And so, Mr. Chair, I have to submit for the record, I know this is not your only source, I heard you, but, unnamed source in a viral Minnesota Somali fraud video is a right-wing lobbyist who called Muslim demons. But why this is more disturbing, and I don't know if any of you shared it, but I want you to know that who shared it, despite this, and all the falsehoods that my colleagues have already highlighted in a very, very shameful way, that this video has been shared widely and proudly by Attorney General Pam Bondi, by FBI Director Kash Patel, by Vice President J.D. Vance, who actually called the video, quote, far more useful journalism than any of our winners of the 2024 Pulitzer Prizes. The video creators, Nick Shirley, has built this career, right, but on a lot of Islamophobia and dehumanization, that I just feel as public servants, as you root out fraud, and you have to, that you don't make it out that it's about the Somali community. It's about maybe not having the checks and balances and maybe, again, wanting to do that. But I urge you all, because this is the same person that also talked about the community I represent in the city of Dearborn. And again, there are children watching, and I say this, that racist rhetoric, no matter faith or ethnicity, against any of our neighbors is not going to prevent fraud. Doing this will not prevent fraud. We already saw Trump administration using this story to pretext of sending 2,000 federal agents to target and harass Somali American community. I mean, do you agree with that? Sending troops in?
I don't think ICE agents are troops, and ICE agents should be able to do their job anywhere in America.
I meant federal agents. You're right. I meant federal agents, ma'am. Do you believe federal agents should come in and 2,000 federal agents should come into your state?
I think ICE agents should be doing their job anywhere in America. It's their jurisdiction, and if there are
But
criminals,
that's the response of the president. So if
there are criminals who need to be
Yes, I
deported, they should be deported.
But that's not what's going to happen. Representative Hudson?
I absolutely welcome immigration enforcement in the state of Minnesota.
But do you think it's really immigration enforcement? Because they're racially profiling. They're going to just stop people that look Somali or look Muslim or ethnic and just harass them. And I'm telling you, as somebody that for the first time ever, my mother in 50 years being here, and the sweetest woman, she'd feed anybody. She doesn't care if you're a Republican, Democrat. She would make sure you're not hungry and fed. And she's carrying a passport for the first time in her life here because she knows because she wears a hijab, she might be stopped by an ICE agent. Is that the kind of militarization? I know you won't get stopped, but somebody like my mother and somebody like your Somali American neighbors in Minnesota will be stopped in a way that is dehumanizing. They do it in front of kids. They don't care. And I'm saying this to you and asking all of you, do your job, but don't allow your job and what you're doing to be utilized as a racist trope that all Somali Americans are criminals, that Muslims are demons. It's incredibly dangerous. And so, Representative Robbins, Hudson Yark, one of the things that the collective punishment, right? I mean, the fact that now I'm seeing the Trump administration say, okay, we're going to cut child care and social services to California, Illinois, New York, Minnesota, Colorado. Is that really the answer? Is that going to prevent fraud? Do you believe cutting 23,000 kids from child care, do you think that's going to prevent fraud?
So my understanding, it's not being cut. If they can document that the actual children are there and that they have attendance records, they will get the funding. So this is a misnomer saying it's all going to be cut. It's not true.
We'll see. Representative Hudson?
I tend not to blame firemen for water damage when they put out a fire.
Okay.
And that's what's going on.
So you're good with them cut. Okay. How about you?
I believe in the due process of law. And so back to your comment about your dear mother, because she wears a hijab and she has to carry her passport. So I think that every person has value. Everyone is a child of God, right? And we may have a different name, but here's the thing, is that they all deserve respect.
Absolutely.
They all deserve kindness. They all deserve the process of law and due process.
And I'll tell you,
that is what we believe in.
And I see it among my community. It's a very diverse community. We're calling people on other, folks that are, no matter what their background is, because we don't want any criminal activity or fraud because we know it hurts everybody. But I'm asking all of you, as you do this, your job, call out against the racist comments. protect everyone in Minnesota, no matter their faith or ethnicity. So be careful in sharing these videos. I'm sorry, Chairman, this is important. Be careful as you do your job not to allow people that you all are trying to root out fraud to be used as a ploy to go after Muslims and Somali
ladies,
Americans.
time's expired. Thank you. Chair, before I recognize Mr. Cloud, Mr. Gill has a unanimous consent request.
Sure, yep. This is from the Minnesota Reformer, Somali American former investigator, why you're hearing about fraud in my community.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now, do you have another one? Okay. Chair recognizes Mr. Cloud from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and I appreciate you holding this hearing. It's important, as you have mentioned at the outset, that we continue our work to uncover waste, fraud, and abuse, and especially in holding this hearing, kind of brings some light to this issue that the media really, they were scooped. And so in a sense that they're having to cover this issue when really they should have been the ones to investigate and reveal this is telling. No doubt there's fraud everywhere. When you're spending trillions of dollars, there's going to be pockets of fraud. But one of the things that's been revealing this year as we've worked through the DOJ process is uncovering the extent of the fraud, how it's been systemized, weaponized, and how we've really unveiled that it's the world's history's largest money laundering scheme. And much of this should be a bipartisan issue to go after the waste, fraud, and abuse, but what we found out is much of the taxpayer funding is going to uphold leftist organizations and their campaign practices and the like. What's particularly telling about this issue in Minnesota isn't the fact that there's waste, fraud, and abuse. No doubt that's happening in a number of states, and we need to continue the work to clean it up. But the way that this has been systemized, institutionalized, and the corrupt and corrosive nature and even criminal coercion that went on from the governor's office and his administration is particularly troubling. I think it's notable that the Biden administration was aware of this, even as they tried to sell the Harris-Walz administration on the American people, and perhaps that's why we didn't see this come to light as we should. But Representative Hudson, I appreciated something you said in your testimony in the sense that you said how the structure of these programs creates incentives that reliably produce the waste, fraud, and abuse across multiple service areas, regardless of the program or intent. And this is kind of what we see oftentimes, that for good intentions maybe, Congress upstands these programs, but over the decades what we've seen is they've expanded to where many of them almost end up being a system of waste, fraud, and abuse with a veneer of care and concern for people. And our job in Congress is to help bring the tools to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so the ranking member said, where fraud exists, we should look into it. We should hold people accountable. What we see coming from the left a lot of times is they're fine with the reactionary. We're fine in bringing prosecutions after the fact because the money's already gone out. We're fine with prosecuting people who do ballot harvesting once the ballots are in the pot and we can't separate them. But it's far better for us to prevent it. I'd like to talk to, I'll start with you, Mr. Hudson, but if y'all want to jump in, what controls states should be putting in, but really it comes down to us in saying whatever federal dollars you are receiving, you should be getting these controls in place. So could you speak to the institutionalization of this fraud and the schemes that are in place, maybe list some examples and then speak to some of the controls that you would recommend that we take on legislatively to make sure states are doing their job?
It's a very big question, and I'll try to be concise. So I haven't put a whole lot of thought into what Congress should do, given my state legislative role, but I can tell you that states are primarily responsible for the administration of these programs, for setting up rules, for engaging in verification and compliance. And so what I imagine Congress can do is provide either incentive or some form of, for lack of a better term, punishment to states who fail to do that.
Currently, states are actually incentivized, in a sense, to game the system against the American taxpayer.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so the programs in Minnesota need to be redesigned from top to bottom. I mean, it needs to be like a demolition and a rebuild, because the way they're currently structured, I think most Americans, when they think about benefit programs, they think about like their neighbor and how they would help out their neighbor. But that's not how these programs work. It's not relational. It doesn't come with expectations or gratitude or an incentive to make your life better. It is set up to create a perpetual industry out of taking money from taxpayers.
Yeah, that's troubling. Would you like to speak to that?
Yes, I think one of the most practical things you can do is to require documentation from the recipient and from the provider. In Minnesota, most of these providers are set up and the recipients based on attestation. And nobody then goes and checks, are they really eligible? Are the services actually being provided? We had the Housing Stabilization Program. They estimate 90% of it was fraud. Nobody checked if services were actually being provided. And I think you could also require repayment to the feds if there's fraud, and that would make states pay attention to administration if they had to repay the money if it was not spent on the proper services.
Thank you. Those are a few good tips. We'll hopefully stay in communication. My time's up.
Chair,
I know we opened up a can of worms there that could take another hour or two, but thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Min.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate today's hearing, and I am deeply concerned about the allegations of fraud that we are learning about around the disbursement of social services funding in Minnesota. This is fraud of the worst kind. It's literally taking food out of the mouths of hungry kids so that people can enrich themselves. And just for your clarification, I've actually spent my career fighting fraud. My first job out of law school was at the SEC. This was in the aftermath of another major set of frauds, the Enron and WorldCom accounting scandals, which, of course, from the private sector, not the public sector. In Congress, this has been my just over a year at this point, but I was happy to sponsor H.R. 1156, a Republican-led bill that came before this committee last year. And I think that we need aggressive enforcement and accountability when it comes to taxpayer dollars and their disbursement. That being said, I have concerns about this hearing, as well as recent actions taken by the Trump administration. And it's hard for me not to look at this hearing and the context in which it's taking place and not see this as a partisan and racist hearing. And for the reasons mentioned by my colleague, but we have not had other hearings when it comes to fraud that takes place in Republican-led states. We've not had hearings in this committee, as far as I'm aware, or in any other committee this year, as long as I've been in Congress, that go after those who are not Somali American. And so I hope you all can appreciate that by holding this hearing in isolation of any other hearings around oversight or fraud, that it looks like we're going after one community in one state when we know it's rampant. So I guess my first question to you all, and you all can raise your hand, or if you don't want to raise your hand, feel free to not raise your hand, but do you believe that fraud only takes place in Democratic-led states?
No.
Okay.
No.
And do you believe that fraud only takes place in the Somali communities?
No.
Absolutely not.
No.
Would it surprise you to know that the Congress has not done hearings on either frauds that have taken place in Republican-led states or on frauds that have taken place in non-Somalian communities
So
this year, since I've taken Congress, or that this Oversight Committee in particular, in this session?
the Minnesota legislature, we are literally drowning in fraud.
Those are yes/no questions.
And
So I'm going to
so
reclaim my time, so
we
thank you very
spend
much.
all of our
And so I
time
would just say
doing
that if this was a serious hearing, if this was a more serious attempt at oversight, we'd be looking across the board. This is also hard to not take in the context of President Trump's announcement, I think just yesterday, that he would be illegally, I would add, withholding funds for child care and other purposes from states led by Democratic governors, including not only Minnesota, but my home state of California, as well as several others. Kids are going to go hungry in my district when we have not seen evidence of any type of fraud on the scale we're talking about in California, in Colorado, in Illinois, and yet Donald Trump is withholding funds from those states.
You don't know.
And so it looks like a very partisan effort here to go after blue states. $10 billion is being withheld. $10 billion. And we already have struggling people right now trying to pay the bills because of rising health care costs, inflation, et cetera. It's cruel and vindictive. It is also, I think, another example of the ways in which President Trump and this committee and this Republican-led Congress look increasingly like they're weaponizing the government to go after Democrats and people they perceive as their political critics rather than going out and trying to address fraud in all ways, shapes, and forms. We know, for example, that there have been massive frauds that have been uncovered in places like Florida, Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And I want to highlight Mississippi because Mississippi has made a lot of news recently because they've had the largest public corruption scandal in their history. And yet this committee has not addressed that once. We have not done a hearing on it. There's been no letters or inquiries, as far as I understand, this year at my time in Congress. So this is quite problematic. It includes celebrities like Brett Favre, we all know about. And so it's very problematic to me that we are not actually doing this. Now, Mr. Ballou, you mentioned earlier that it's hard to uncover fraud or know about fraud or know the motivations when we are getting rid of Inspector General. I think that was your implication. And I just want to lean into that just a little bit, because I think what the Republicans have done in your state actually makes a lot of sense to me. Receiving tips from the public, investigating those tips, and then trying to provide transparency around your findings. And yet that is, Mr. Ballou, that is what Inspectors General do, right?
That's precisely their job.
And would it surprise you to know that this committee, which is tasked with overseeing the federal government, has done 0 hearings since Donald Trump fired all the Inspector Generals at the beginning of his term?
That's unfortunate.
We really can't have a discussion around fraud, misuse of taxpayer dollars, or waste if we aren't talking about the fact that we just got rid of all the people that are supposed to oversee that. So I have one last question here. And
your time's expired. You've gone over a minute, but you
No, I didn't go over a minute.
firing the
7
Inspector
seconds
General
over.
when you
7 seconds
admit
over.
there's massive fraud in Republican states too. The IGs have failed.
Can I
Why
ask
should we
you,
keep funding
point of
these
parliamentary-
agencies when there's evidence that the money has been defrauded?
I have a parliamentary inquiry for you, sir.
Well, go ahead.
Are we allowed to use this committee's resources to only go after fraud or states of one party?
No, we can go after fraud in any party.
So are we going to look into Mississippi the way that we're looking into Minnesota?
If you bring stuff forward, you have whistleblowers come forward, we will look after it in any state.
You will hold a hearing. Do I have your commitment?
Well, it depends on the evidence.
All
right, Chair now recognizes Mr. Burleson from Missouri.
Thank
you, Mr. Chairman. And
I've already recognized Mr. Burleson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And actually, I'd like to remind the committee that this party, this side of the aisle, has dedicated tremendous resources to rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. In fact, the chairman set up a committee called DOGE that the other side of the aisle demonized and criticized in our efforts in which we had multiple hearings to identify waste, fraud, and abuse throughout all of the government agencies. And so I applaud the chairman and this side for the work that we've been doing. But, sadly, Minnesota has become an example because of the extent of the waste and the fraud. I have to ask, it must be embarrassing for the citizens of Minnesota. Chairwoman Robbins.
So I'm not embarrassed to be from Minnesota, but I am frustrated and angry about the theft of taxpayer money.
I have a family that live in Minnesota. It's a wonderful state, and I know that they are angry, that they're very frustrated. So I think that we talk about the amount of money that's being wasted, $9 billion. That seems like an abstract amount, but let's break that down. $9 billion stolen from less than 6 million citizens of Minnesota, correct? That's per individual. Imagine, right, every citizen of Minnesota, your bank account, suddenly someone took $1,500 out of your bank account. Every taxpayer, there's around 3 million citizens or taxpayers in Minnesota. Every taxpayer just had $3,000 stolen from their bank account. How does that feel to a citizen of Minnesota?
Minnesotans are so frustrated because not only have we had that money stolen from us, but we had an $18 billion surplus that Tim Walz spent and then raised our taxes $11 billion and left us with a $6 billion deficit. So we've had the fiscal mismanagement on top of the fraud, and Minnesotans are completely fed up.
In Missouri, there's also an opportunity cost to all that money. So in Missouri, we just greenlit a project to add more lanes to I-70, which runs from one end of the state to the other, and it was less than $3 billion. You could imagine people in Minnesota could enjoy adding additional lanes on interstates, on 3 of your interstates, I-35, I-94, I-90. Don't you think the people of Minnesota would love to have wider lane or more lanes added to their highway infrastructure?
They absolutely would. But even if we stayed in the social service realm, there was $104 million in 1 year that was fraudulent in the Housing Stabilization Service. If we could have taken that $104 million and put it into supportive housing, we would have done a lot to solve the homelessness problem. So every time these dollars are fraudulently stolen, it is a huge opportunity cost for Minnesotans.
Absolutely. And you've been sounding the alarm for quite some time. Why has it taken until 2025 for these to fully come to light?
The Fraud Prevention and State Oversight Committee was formed in 2025 once we had a tie in the House.
So when you guys, the Republicans took majority, you finally, or you were able to actually root out the waste, fraud, and abuse in Minnesota, which is why we now know about it.
Yes, we're in a tie technically, but we were able to negotiate this as part of the power sharing agreement.
I seek unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to enter into the record a article from the New York Post. Former Homeland Security agent claims prosecutors ignored Minnesota daycare fraud cases. They just evaporated.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. So there's been investigations been going on for some time. I understand you don't report them, or have really kind of bypassed the state agencies. You report directly to the federal government. Can you elaborate on why that is? It's pretty obvious why, but.
So when my staff, we have a very small staff. We have one researcher on our committee, and then we as members also do a lot of our own research. And when we get an investigation that is credible, we do as much research as we can. But as I said earlier, we don't have access to bank records, health records, or the state payment system. And so based on that, when we get something that's credible, we turn it over to the Office of Legislative Auditor and to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I have been accused of hiding whistleblower data from the department, but when the department comes to hearings, we provide documents every time. I flagged 72 child care centers. We've given them lists of all of the housing, multiple addresses where there's more than 5 providers, sometimes up to 22 providers at the same address. They've done nothing with it. But what I don't give them is the whistleblower information, because I'm protecting our whistleblowers in Minnesota. They finally are stepping up, and I have their back.
Good for you, and I appreciate you for doing that. And then finally, with that, I'll end. I have more articles to submit for the record, Mr. Chairman.
Do you want to submit them now, or are you going to submit them? Okay, go, proceed.
Okay, one is an article produced was about child care welfare fraud.
Without objection to ordered.
A report produced by the Office of Legislative Auditor of Minnesota, Child Care Assistance Programs Assessment of Fraud Allegations.
Without objection to ordered.
And then from the Minnesota House Research Group, the Child Care Assistance Programs and the Fraud Within.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Frost from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is very important that we eliminate fraud in our social programs, and I'm glad that Governor Walz has taken real concrete steps in Minnesota to combat fraud, like signing legislation to strengthen states' agencies' ability to detect, prevent, and prosecute fraud, and establishing a statewide Inspector General Coordinating Council and appointing an independent state auditor to investigate claims. Mr. Balu, how will these actions help uncover and prevent fraud in the state?
Well, it's the funding and staffing that's necessary to uncover fraud that's happening at a state level, but that staffing is not being mirrored at the federal level.
What do you mean by that?
Well, bluntly, most of the enforcement mechanisms for going after white-collar crime are being decimated, especially in the Justice Department, but also the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Of course. As you pointed out, it's important for governors to play a big role in fighting fraud in their state. I want to give you a hypothetical. Let's say that you have a state's governor that funnels millions of dollars from the state's money over to the governor's wife's nonprofit. Let's say then that nonprofit takes that same money and gives it to political action committees that help her husband's causes. Would that be worth investigating?
Absolutely.
What say the rest of the witnesses? In that hypothetical, is that something we should also investigate?
So I don't think we're in a place to talk about hypotheticals, but thank you for the question.
The rest of the witnesses, you don't think we should investigate fraud? What do you think?
I think I came here prepared to talk about the fraud that's taking place in my state and contain my testimony to the purpose of the hearing.
Representative Robbins?
I think we should investigate credible allegations of fraud wherever they are, but we don't know the
Thank you. I
specifics of
100%
that
agree with you, Representative. And
circumstance.
actually, I want to talk about something that's really important because my colleague Dave Min just brought up something. And Chair Comer, you had said if there's If there's credible allegations, if there's evidence, we should look into it, and I have something for us to look into. This is not a hypothetical. This happened in my state of Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis, Casey DeSantis, and the Hope Florida Foundation have been subject to a bipartisan investigation and now a criminal investigation for this exact same thing I just talked about. So if we're going to be here going state by state in this committee talking about fraud, I'm okay with doing that. But let's make sure it's not just Democratic states, like Dave Min said, and let's also look at Republican-led states as well. Because what happened in my state of Florida is $10 million of Medicaid money was funneled to the governor's wife's nonprofit. Then that nonprofit took that money and gave it to political action committees helping her husband. I'd like to insert for the record a unanimous consent from the New York Times. Why did a charity tied to Casey DeSantis suddenly get $10 million boost?
Without objection, so ordered.
Chair Comer, will you commit to working with me to schedule a hearing on this?
Get the stuff to me, and we'll definitely look at it. $10 million. We're talking about $9 billion today.
does
But
the
yeah,
$10
get that to me. Appreciate
Yeah, I'll get it to you. I'll get it to you. Definitely a lower amount of money, but $10 million of Medicaid money going to being funneled from taxpayer Floridians to political action committees is fraud and is criminal. And this is a bipartisan investigation looked at by both Democrats and Republicans, and I definitely expect this committee to do the same thing. And I have one more thing I want to talk about that Representative Ansari brought up. President Trump reposted conspiracy theories on his Truth Social account about the murder of Minnesota state legislators Mark and Melissa Hortman that suggests that Minnesota Governor Tim Walz had the Hortmans assassinated. Governor Walz says this behavior will get more innocent people killed, and the Hortman children have come out on the president and said and called on the president to take the statements down. I think it is very important that we are very clear that we condemn this type of behavior. So I just want to go down the line and hear if you agree with the Hortman children that we should condemn, and we ask the president to take down this post. Mr. Bayou?
Yes.
Representative?
So as the longest serving member on this panel of Minnesota, I am so offended that anybody would accuse anybody of the assassination other than Lance Bolter, because this was a deep scar in the state of Minnesota and all of us personally. I served with Melissa Hortman my entire 13 years, and it is just unbelievably beyond the pale.
Do you agree that we should call on the president to take down the post? That's it.
I said what I said. I think that it's beyond the pale that anybody talk about
you can't come to call on the president, take down the post. So it's okay. We'll move on. Representative Hudson, we'll move on. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. We'll move on. You can't call on the president, take down this post. We'll move on to Representative Hudson. It's just a yes or no.
I cannot deceive the committee by giving it a binary. I have spoken to this many times. I have renounced the content of these ridiculous conspiracy theories, and I've called them ridiculous on multiple occasions.
That's great. Do you think it's appropriate for the President of the United States
I am not going to engage in the silly condemnation game.
No. This is not. No. This is not silly. This is the
What
president.
did you have to say about the assassination of Charlie Kirk? What did you have to say about Jay Jones, who's the chief law enforcement officer in the state of Virginia, fantasizing about shooting Republicans
I will reclaim my time.
Die
the gentleman
in their
will
mother's
stop
arms.
talking
I'm not
on
playing
my
this game.
Time. The gentleman will stop talking on my time.
Order. We'll give you a few seconds to close, Mr. Frost.
I have to comment on this because this is not silly. It is not silly to expect good behavior from the people at the highest levels of our government.
Do you expect from Jay Jones?
No, not your time.
Do you expect from Jay Jones?
Not your time, including the President of the United States. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Timmons from South Carolina. Is that right? Yeah, Mr. Timmons.
Mr. Chairman, we're only 1 week into 2026, and the Democrats are having a tough year. Here we are. This should not be a partisan issue. We've uncovered $9 billion in fraud. It doesn't matter if it's a red state or a blue state. That's $9 billion. And you got to remember, the purpose of these social safety nets is to help people that need help. And when we have that amount of fraud, it undermines the purpose of the social safety nets. The people that want and need the benefits that they are deserving because they're American citizens, they're unable to get them because people are stealing money. And it's even somewhat comical because just a few days ago, when the Trump administration executed the most incredible, they technically executed a warrant on Maduro, a narco-terrorist, they were able to not have a single casualty from our military. They limited collateral damage, and they executed what is truly just a perfect tactical military operation. And the Democrats have gone ballistic over it. Gone ballistic. This man has had warrants out for his arrest for 5 years. He's had a $25 million bounty, which was increased to a $50 million bounty. This is not a partisan issue. He has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans over the last few decades because he's sent drugs here for Americans to use and they've died from it. This is not a partisan issue. Venezuela was a huge step in the right direction. Peace through strength works. We got to get together and we got to work on the issues that the American people want us to work on. And seeking out waste, fraud, and abuse, seeking out $9 billion in theft of social safety net money is something that should not be partisan. And the fact that my colleagues across the aisle are going ballistic over these ridiculous ancillary issues and trying to cast shade over what should not be a partisan issue is just ridiculous. So get it together. We need to do the job that the American people sent us here to do. I want to actually point something out. So Representative Robbins, my understanding is that around $250 million in fraud was found in the 4 years of the Biden administration. There were a number of indictments, dozens of indictments. Is that number about right?
Yes, I think now they're up to about $310 million for the Feeding Our Future.
All right, thank you. So in the last year, we're at $9 billion. Is that the number you got?
Yes, the U.S. Attorney has estimated that the total fraud in the Medicaid portion, which has nothing to do with Feeding Our Future, so it's on top of that $310 million, is half of it is fraud.
Thank you. Mr. Blue, you see where I'm going with this? So you're saying that we have had, we've decimated the budget of the IGs, which, by the way, weren't doing their jobs because we've uncovered, $8.6 billion more dollars in fraud with less resources. So how do you explain your testimony earlier that we've decimated the entities that are designed to investigate fraud when we've uncovered exponentially more fraud with less resources? How do you explain that?
You know, what we've been talking about today is not just regular fraud, but public corruption. And
so this is the thing. We are not having a hearing on public corruption. We are having a hearing on $9 billion in fraud associated with Minnesota social safety nets. And so you keep pushing back on that. You keep pushing back on this narrative that we should be seeking out waste, fraud, and abuse everywhere by saying that the Trump administration has decimated the entities that are designed to seek out waste, fraud, and abuse, and yet those same entities have uncovered exponentially more fraud.
The problem is that they haven't charged any public officials, and the public integrity section has been
Your logic is flawed, and you know your logic is flawed. I just wanted to point it out. It's okay. So I guess I want to get to this. We have a limited amount of money. We have $37 trillion in debt. We run a $2 trillion annual deficit. And we have spent much of this year seeking out waste, fraud, and abuse, trying to get our fiscal house back in order because we're running out of time. So this cannot be a partisan issue. We cannot solve these problems without a bipartisan approach. So I have a bill that I filed. It's called the TABS Act. And what it does is it uses technology to confirm income eligibility. So $1.5 trillion every year go to social safety nets that are means tested, meaning depending on where you live, if you make too much money, you don't get them. And so if we use technology to real-time verify, you can actually give the social safety net to the person that's seeking it way faster, in most cases immediately, and then you can remove them from that social safety net in real time. In the big, beautiful bill, we changed it from once a year to twice a year, and that saved $10 billion. If you do it in real time, you are going to save 20% of the money. So if you extrapolate that over 10 years, it's about $2.5 trillion in savings for means-tested social safety nets. These are the kind of things we need to be doing. This is not a partisan issue. We all agree that people fall on hard times, and we need to help them up. We need to help them up. But if we have $9 billion of fraud in Minnesota, imagine what we have in California. Imagine what we have in New York. Imagine what we have across this country, and we've got to get a handle on it because we're running out of time. We can't keep spending money we don't have. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Palmer from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Robbins, how long do you think the corrupt activity has been going on in Minnesota?
We have whistleblower reports dating back from 2013 or 2014, so through the Dayton administration and the Walz administration.
Over a decade. Okay. Why is it that we're just now seeing, having this fully uncovered, and I'm not sure it's fully uncovered yet. Why is it, I mean, you've got an attorney general, you've got a governor who claims to be pure as the driven snow, and you get a lot of snow in Minnesota. Why is it just now coming out?
Well, because it's been a failure of the administration, particularly our Office of Management and Budget, who has responsibility constitutionally for this, and they have not been doing their job. But because we were able to create this oversight committee, it's the first time in the history of our legislature we've had an oversight committee.
Would you agree that with this fraud going on over a decade, and basically the lackadaisical or disinterested approach from your government, that's why it's necessary for the Oversight Committee here in Congress to take this up? Would you agree with that?
I do. We're grateful for your help because we don't have the resources and we don't have subpoena power and some of the tools that you have.
Well, the reason that, one of the reasons that I don't think we need to bring Mississippi in here is because they've been very aggressive in their investigation and prosecution along with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I just want to point that out, Mr. Chairman, that we wouldn't be sitting here today asking the questions that we're having to ask if the governor of Minnesota, Walz, and the Attorney General and the other people that are responsible for oversight had acted expeditiously in investigating this themselves. So that's why we're here, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
I appreciate all of you being here. The charges and reports of fraudulent autism centers in Minnesota are shocking to me. Could you describe to us your committee's findings in this area, Ms. Robbins, and how these fraudsters were operating?
It is really shocking. So there were autism centers that are a Medicaid waiver program, and people were getting paid kickbacks to sign their kids up to participate in the autism center so they could build Medicaid. And these children didn't necessarily have autism. We have substantiated, court documented by the U.S. Attorney how the parents were getting their kids falsely diagnosed with autism so that then they could get a kickback to participate in billing Medicaid for autism services.
It's not just the fraud in terms of money, it's the abuse of children by their parents that has taken place here. And they were able to defraud the EDIBI program millions.
Yes, I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg in understanding it. There's been a handful of charges, but we expect more.
Mr. Hudson, do you think General Ellison or Governor Walz was aware of the fraud prior to the exposure that has been brought now?
Oh, there's simply no doubt. I mean, again, referring to the exhibit that I submitted with my testimony, 2,500 pages of OLA reports citing all of the red flags and risk factors, and they did not take appropriate action.
Why do you think they did that, Mr. Hudson and Ms. Rarick? She's about to hit her button, so go ahead.
In my opinion, the simplest answer, the most logical answer is that they didn't want to know the answer to the question, because the answer to the question was going to require them to take action against one of their favorite political
But
constituents.
it's also been alleged that they may have benefited.
Yeah, that has been alleged, and I hope the evidence is entered into the record through investigation and prosecution.
Well, it's going to be a thorough investigation. Ms. Rarick, you were about to say something?
Just really quickly. So I think it should be noted, we haven't said this yet, but Jim Nobles was our legislative auditor for 38 years, and he did an article, or he did a statement in the Star Tribune on December 29th of 25, and he said literally all the state needed to do was implement standard financial controls and oversight. Why the Walz administration did not do that is still a mystery, but it's disturbing.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I think we just heard full justification for why we're having to have this hearing, why we'll have to follow up, because clearly the state of Minnesota had almost a lack of interest, maybe even an interest in covering it up. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back and look forward to further investigating this
Thank you, Mr.
fraud.
Palmer. I think the evidence is clear as well. Chair now recognizes Ms. Luna from Florida.
Thank you, Chairman Comer. Before I get to the questioning of some of our witnesses today, and thank you again for being here, I would like to make a motion to subpoena journalist Seth Harp for leaking classified information, including doxing a Delta Force commander on Operation Absolute Resolve, which liberated the Venezuelan people and brought a terrorist dictator to the United States to face justice for his crimes against American citizens.
A motion has been made, another motion by Ms. Luna. The committee will hold this motion in abeyance till the end of today's hearing. The committee will now proceed. Chair recognizes.
Thank you, Chairman Comer.
I make a motion to request this in writing.
Hold on. There's been a parliamentary inquiry.
Yeah,
by
parliamentary
Mr. Frost.
inquiry. We'd like to request this in writing.
Okay.
I can submit that. If I can just right after this, I'll totally submit that to you guys, because I have some other motions that we're voting on at the end. This is a great motion in writing. We want everyone on record for this one. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Ms. Luna.
Thank you, Chairman Comer. Honorable Robbins, based on your record before your committee, when did Governor Walz first become aware of widespread fraud in Minnesota social service programs?
I would assume that he has been aware of it since he ran for office for governor in 2018.
By 2017, DHS investigators warned CCAP fraud could exceed 50%. What was that information elevated to the governor's office?
Yes, there was an OLA report.
Thank you, ma'am. By 2020, state officials knew feeding our future invoices were fraudulent. We know that payments continued to the AG's knowledge. Did they continue to the governor's knowledge as well?
Yes.
Attorney General Ellison agreed on tape to fight Minnesota's own Department of Human and Health Services in exchange for Somali political and financial support. In your personal opinion, do you believe it is a possibility that Governor Walz also made that personal deal, or that he at least knew about the Attorney General's agreement?
I don't know.
Okay. I don't want to rehash what you guys have spent hours answering. We know that there's a big issue with the fraud in Minnesota. So on a number of things, I'd first like to point out, thank you for being here today, but because of your testimony and because of some of the evidence that we've seen brought forward, as well as I'm sure the fact that this committee, I assume, at Chairman Comer's direction, will be soon subpoenaing AG Ellison, I would like to make criminal referrals regarding Governor Walz as well as AG Ellison. As you know, U.S. Code 371 and U.S. Code 2, which deals with criminalized conspiracies to defraud the United States and establishes liability for individuals who knowingly aid or abet the commission of federal offense, includes willful blindness or deliberate inaction where duties to act exist. So I will be referring them later on today. Now, aside from that, I do just want to point out that there is a statute that you can denaturalize citizens if their applications were fraudulent, and also too if within 10 years of their naturalization that they committed fraud in the U.S. And so I take this very seriously, and it's very unfortunate that these people chose to do this, because being an American citizen is not a right, it's a privilege, especially if you were not born here. And so with that idea in mind, I would like to say that these criminals took advantage of the very country that gave them refuge. They do not deserve the privilege of remaining here, and frankly, they don't deserve to even be imprisoned here, which is why, as the chairwoman of the El Salvador caucus, I work very strongly with President Bukele, and we also know that CCOT has proven to be a great facility to house people that are denaturalized and deemed not worthy of U.S. citizenship, and I will be making referrals for those individuals if they are found guilty. Thank you for being here today. Chairman, I yield my time.
Will you yield the last 2 minutes you had?
Yes, sir, to you.
All right. So we've talked a lot about Governor Walz. I think you all have done a tremendous job codifying the fact that there's massive amounts of waste in Minnesota. This has been taking place for years, and yet nothing's been done. The Democrats want to keep spending more money. They're like, why are we cutting off funding temporarily? We need to spend more money, throw more money at the problem. That's not working. The American people aren't going to have it. Thank you all for being here today to talk about this. I know it takes a lot of courage, and I'm sure you're probably getting threats from certain people that have benefited from this, and others that are misinformed by some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. We've talked about Walz. You've stated that Walz has been well aware of this, but we haven't talked a lot about Attorney General Ellison. Very quickly, do you all have anything to add about his knowledge? Was he aware of this? Go ahead, Ms. Rank.
Thank you. I actually had that document in front of me that I wanted to share. So this is from a press release that we actually confronted him with when we had a hearing and he was in front of us. And the press release is from September 26th of 2022. And this is from a press release from his office. And it says, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison and his office have been deeply involved for 2 years in holding Feeding Our Future accountable. Now, The tape that we've been talking about as well, where he said he would go to bat for the fraudsters against state agencies, which, by the way, were his clients, happened 1 year prior to this press release. So if he had been working to oust the fraudsters for feeding our future, he would have known who they were at the time of that meeting. He claimed in front of us that he did not know who they were. That was his reason to meet with them. And by the way, I would say that he did not meet with him in his official office, which is highly suspect. He met with them at a strip mall, I think, something like that.
Okay. Well, we've invited him to be at our next hearing on this. If he doesn't respond very soon, he will be receiving a subpoena to be here at the next hearing, and we look forward to working with you and any other whistleblowers who want to come forward to ask Mr. Ellison specific questions. Now, Chair recognizes Mr. Gill for unanimous consent.
I've got a unanimous consent request to enter into the record. Former legislative auditor, is the Walz administration finally awake about fraud?
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes are you ready, Mr. Langworthy, or? So, Mr. McGuire, Chair recognizes Mr. McGuire from Virginia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today and for your tireless work on your committee to investigate and sound the alarm for fraud in your state. After receiving a mandate from the American people and taking office, President Trump and this administration have worked tirelessly to root out and put an end to waste, fraud, and abuse in our federal government. The recent child care fraud that has come to light in Minnesota is just the latest example of why the American people deserve to have oversight and how their taxpayer dollars are being spent. Talking with constituents in my district, I had one guy say to me, he said, John, why should we even pay taxes? The signal that we're getting around our country is that you do everything right and you pay your taxes, and these folks are buying homes in foreign countries. These fraudsters are stealing from the American people, we the people. And one constituent said, we're not paying taxes, we're paying criminals. We need to know where our taxpayer dollars are going. The 20 million or so illegal aliens that came into our country have come here to break the donkey's back. You know, if you want to break a donkey's back, you keep loading it on until his back breaks. And we're sick and tired of the waste, fraud, and abuse. For some reason, it seems like our friends on the other side of the aisle partner with the fraudsters and not those people that are identifying the fraud. You may remember during the Summer of Love, when they were burning our cities for 80 days, instead of supporting the police, they wanted to defund the police and use their dollars to bail them out of jail so they continue burning our cities. It makes no sense. Recently, we got Maduro out of his country to stand trial for killing and terrorizing thousands of American citizens. And instead of telling the military what a great job they did, they had protests around the country for Maduro. And by the way, I had a friend in the airport in Buenos Aires. When it was announced, the entire airport cheered. And people in Venezuela said that they've been eaten out of trash cans, and family members got into prostitution because their family was starving. They're trying to survive. As a Navy SEAL veteran, I served in Venezuela during the 90s, and it was one of the most prosperous, strongest economic countries, safest places in South America, and they've ruined it. So anyway, the people are sick and tired of the waste, fraud, and abuse. In reference to the most recent child care fraud scandal coming to light, by a spokesperson for Governor Walz said the governor has worked for years to crack down on fraud and asked the state legislature for more authority to take aggression on this action. He has strengthened oversight. Ms. Robinson, Mr. Hudson, and Mr. rhetoric as members of the Fraud Prevention and State Agency and Oversight Committee. Do you agree that Governor Walz has strengthened oversight in the state of Minnesota? Yes or no?
No, he belatedly took action this fall because of the enormous pressure that is coming to bear, but his agencies always had the authority that he trumpeted now.
No, he simplified the problem by pretending that you can solve it by appointing somebody to look at it. This needs systemic reform.
He absolutely shredded oversight, simply.
Yeah, and I heard through testimony that it was career suicide to speak up. But Ms. Robinson, you've been very vocal about the mistreatment of whistleblowers by Governor Walz. Can you speak to some of the ways that Governor Walz and his administration have retaliated against whistleblowers?
Yes, I've met with many whistleblowers who have spoken about how they were told that they would be demoted or reassigned. I know of people who were reassigned. We also know that they were surveilled in their place of work when people thought they might be the quote leaker. Their email and their chat functions were surveilled electronically for words like fraud or whistleblower or compliance or overbilling. So they are under a great deal of stress in the Department of Human Services, and we are grateful for the whistleblowers who have spoken out to us.
So based on all of your knowledge about this scandal or this fraud in Minnesota, I think it's the tip of the iceberg. We're like $37 trillion in debt. And now, I don't know what it is about Somali, but apparently they're using that for Somali daycare centers in Washington State now. And it's come to light that there's some daycare center fraud in Ohio as well associated with Somali. So I think we're just the tip of the iceberg, and there's waste, fraud, and abuse everywhere. And maybe a big chunk of our national debt comes from waste, fraud, and abuse. So I don't care if it's a red state or a blue state. We need to have oversight. We need to protect the American people's taxpayer dollars. The child care fraud brought to light by Nick Shirley is just the latest scandal. In 2022, federal prosecutors charged 47 defendants, majority of whom were from the Minnesota Somali community, for the role they played in feeding our future. Are they still in power in Minnesota?
The Democrats?
No, the Feeding Our Future. What's going on with them now?
So that program was a COVID-era child nutrition program, and that is over, but there's ongoing child nutrition programs that could be fraudulent. So I think they're still working their way through the Feeding Our Future case, but I think there will be need for ongoing oversight of child nutrition programs.
With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Langworthy from Buffalo, New York. Okay, Chair recognizes, we will go to Mr. Stauber, are you ready, prepared, or Ms. Fishbach?
Yeah, Representative Fishbach prior to me, thank you.
Okay, Chair recognizes, we're going to get to our wave-ons, and we may have a few more that will come in. We have a few more Republicans that haven't asked questions yet, but Ms. Fishbach. You recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And before I begin my remarks, I want to enter into the record an email shared by DHS whistleblowers. The email was written by a senior DHS official and sent to other DHS leaders. In the email, the DHS official talks about using military intelligence resources to track down whistleblowers' exact location. And this issue, and I believe this email was alluded to by Representative Rhetoric in her testimony.
Without objection to order.
Thank you so much, and I have one more, and I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record an article titled, "Minnesota Government Whistleblowers Claim They Were Electronically Surveilled, Had Promotions Denied," in the New York Post, dated January 3rd, 2026.
Without objection to order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first, I would like to say thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing us to wave on. This is an incredibly important issue in our state and across the country. It's something that comes up all the time when we're out in the district. And so I thank all of the legislators for being here and for all of your work that you do in order to expose this and dig into it and really figure out what's going on. And I think it was Mr. Burlinson who asked if we were embarrassed. But I'm not embarrassed to be from Minnesota. What I am is really sad that this is happening, and this is what Minnesota is known for now. This horrible fraud, because there's wonderful things that Minnesota does have to offer. And so as a lifelong Minnesotan, it makes me sad that this is what we're having to talk about. And while some may want to downplay this fraud, I want to be clear. This is an explicit and egregious cover-up on the theft of taxpayer dollars. And hundreds of millions stolen from programs intended to help feed children, provide housing, provide child care, even help individuals with autism. And we also have reports that some of this funding is going to terrorist organizations, like was mentioned earlier. Democrats have been in charge in Minnesota for years. And I was in the Minnesota legislature, I know. And they specifically wrote and passed legislation that reduced oversight when handing out federal funds. Democrats seized on COVID in particular to yank back fraud protections, just so that they could hand out money as fast as possible. That was the whole thing. That was the mantra during COVID, is we've got to get it out fast. So we can't have all these regulations and checks and balances on them. Unfortunately, though, this problem isn't new, and it wasn't just from COVID in Minnesota. Whistleblowers report that they've been making reports for years The Democrat leadership at the state level in Minnesota has been actively suppressing whistleblowers, and I think some of the testimony that you've all given today is pointing that out. And that's not an opinion, it is fact. It's fact. So I'm going to ask, maybe we're going to go over some of this a little once again, but I want to make sure that everybody understands that there's a clear answer. Representative Rhetoric, the tweet, where did my sign go? I have a sign. Maybe we don't. But there's an account that is working, that is, I believe, from the whistleblowers. And I just wanted to note, there we go. Thank you. This behind me is the account. Is it run by one whistleblower?
Madam Congressman, no, it actually is comprised of over 1,000 state employees across multiple state agencies.
So this is not just a couple of people. This is a lot of people bringing this to light. And were the whistleblowers ever made to feel unsafe on their attempts to report fraud?
Yes, absolutely. I can give you 2 quotes that they have in the 7-page document that was submitted for this committee hearing. 2 things that they said is, think about your home and what if you lose your job? So these are things said to whistleblowers. Second thing was, we need information about where your kids go to school and where their bus stops are.
And Representative Rarick, that's just incredible stuff. And I know you mentioned it before, but I do think it's worth repeating, because we had whistleblowers. This could have been happening, but there has been Democrat administration after Democrat administration, including Walz and the newer, they have not addressed these things. And they have not said, hey, whistleblowers, we believe you, and we're going to do something about it. And so that's the concern. And I just want to, I'm running low on time, but I wanted to just ask Representative Robbins, and I'm sorry, Mr. Hudson, but you've had some really good moments today, so I'll go to Representative Robbins. As chair of the committee, if these claims of retaliatory action are true, then it violates the law. So if these claims are true, then a state agency is violating our own state whistleblowers' laws. Is that correct?
So the whistleblower statute is for civil penalties. There is no criminal penalty for whistleblower retaliation in statute currently, but we are looking at that for the next session. But that's why when people say, why haven't these people who've retaliated against the whistleblowers been prosecuted, it's because there is no criminal penalty in statute.
Has there been anything by the Attorney General's office, and this is maybe a question that I'll ask if he's comes, anything by the Attorney General's office that would deal with that?
No, we passed a law this session to expand whistleblower protection, because prior to this session, they could only report up through their supervisor or to the state attorney general. And when they did, they were either ghosted or they were retaliated against. So we expanded it, so now they can report to legislators and they can report to law enforcement. And that's how we got this just deluge of whistleblower reports, because now they have somewhere safe to report.
And you have been very indulgent, and I'll just say, after 15 years of Democrat administration in Minnesota, this massive fraud is coming to an end, because we are going to get to it, and I appreciate the work that you have done on your committee, and we will do whatever we can to continue to bring it to light and prosecute those folks involved. So thank you very much, and Mr. Chair, I thank you very much for your indulgence.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent.
Who said that? Oh, yeah, Mr. Bell.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this May 2025 report from the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs entitled Undermining the Watchdogs, the 19 independent inspectors generals fired by President Trump uncovered billions in fraud, waste, and abuse.
Without objection, so ordered. All right, our next Minnesota wave on is Mr. Finstead from Minnesota.
Thank you, Chairman Comer. Thank you for holding this important hearing today, and thank you to our great Minnesota legislators for being here. God bless you and your work. It's been so needed, and you have amplified and created such a voice and opportunity for us to get to the bottom of this, so thank you. Governor Walz's incompetence has put a spotlight on our state by enabling rampant fraud across federally funded, state-administered programs. And for those that aren't from Minnesota, in Minnesota, the Democrat Party goes by the DFL, Democrat Farmer Labor. Well, I'll tell you what, they kicked the farmer out a long time ago, and that F now stands for fraud. And that is wholly owned by Governor Walz, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, and it's on them, and it will be on them forever. Minnesota taxpayers have had more than $9 billion and counting taken from their pockets, yet the Walz administration has failed to take meaningful action to stop this. Since Feeding Our Future scandal came to light, not a single individual responsible for ensuring accountability to these federally funded programs has been fired. Not a single. This would not stand a second in the private sector. I don't care if you're a bank CEO, I don't care if you're a greeter at Walmart, you would not have your job with the incompetence that Governor Walz has displayed in Minnesota. Since I was first elected in 2022, I've joined my Republican colleagues in the congressional delegation, sending numerous letters to Governor Walz and his administration to expose the lawlessness occurring in our state with no response. The Minnesota state legislators here testifying have been on the front lines working to combat this failure and Governor Walz's failure to responsibly steward over the $9 billion in taxpayer money. I thank you for appearing here today. With that being said, we're talking about programs, housing stabilization, daycare, autism centers, Feeding Our Future. I mean, these are all compassionate, good Minnesota values. We want to take care of our neighbors in need. If our neighbors, if they're struggling to find the amount of money to put food on their table, we will take the shirt off our back to help our neighbors in need. These fraudsters preyed on the goodwill of Minnesotans. Minnesota is Minnesota nice, and these fraudsters knew it, and they took advantage of us. So I'm going to start with you, Representative Rarick. Thank you again for your leadership. During your tenure in Minnesota state government, how long have you been working on this issue, and what are some of the craziest, most egregious things that you've seen really that have been identified by the incompetency of our CEO, governor of our state?
Right, so I was elected in 2013, started serving then, and I literally have heard about fraud since 2013. And I'll tell you, every time that it was raised in committee by myself or my colleagues, we were essentially called racist and Islamophobic, or that the fraud really wasn't happening. I remember with the daycare fraud, when there was credible allegations that it was $100 million back in 13, 14, 15, somewhere in there. They prosecuted closer to 5 to 10 million, and so instead of the 100 million, that was what was prosecuted. And so Democrats would say, well, it's really not 100 million, it's really just a couple. And so I know that we had a gentleman behind us come and testify in front of us, and he had a tracker, and they spent the entire time besmirching his good character as opposed to actually talking about the fraud. And that's what we've experienced nonstop every day.
So thank you for that testimony, but also thank you for being strong. Because the politics of intimidation, name-calling, race baiting, they want us to shut up. They want this fraud to continue. And so thank you for being strong. I represent 750,000 of our neighbors in southern Minnesota. It's God's country down there. And, I hear from my neighbors the Democrat control and what it's done to decimate our daycare industry, the affordability, the access. We just struggle with daycare in southern Minnesota. And I can't help but think that, wow, $9 billion sure would go a long ways to help our neighbors in southern Minnesota. The Walz administration has done crazy things. They've weaponized the administration. Heck, we have daycares in southern Minnesota getting fined for leaving chapstick on their office desk. They can find the time to do that, but they can't find the $9 billion. Ridiculous. Representative Robbins, the Democrats at the state and federal level, so we're talking everyone from Angie Craig, Ilhan Omar, Tina Smith, Amy Klobuchar, Tim Walz, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. Have they helped at all in your committee work? Have they been a part of it? Have they said, hey, we want to help try to get rid of this fraud?
No, I don't know of any Democrats who have called out the Walz administration for their absolute failure to protect taxpayer dollars and our vulnerable citizens.
So this is just unbelievable to me that we cannot, in the face of this horrific fraud and crime that's going on, we can't for a brief moment rip the R and the D off our sweatshirt and put the USA on and say enough is enough. And so what you're doing, and by being here today, helping us understand the details and the level of fraud in Minnesota is so important. We can't thank you enough. And Chairman Comer, We stand ready to help you and this committee however we can to put an end to this.
We're serious about it, and we want to work with you. Chair recognizes Mr. Langworthy from Buffalo.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for putting this hearing together so promptly after all of this fraud was unveiled. I'm not going to get into belaboring all the facts that have been revealed here already today, but Representative Robbins, how long do you believe that this fraud was allowed to operate in Minnesota before anyone in state government actually decided to act?
Well, we've had all this going on since 2014 at least, and the Walz administration's been in office 7 years, and they very belatedly took a few actions this fall. So they only came to the table to help pause program and have required audits because of the public pressure.
So we're looking at fraud going back 11 years at this point in untold sums of money. And with the years that this has gone on, who in your mind knew about this fraud, and who do you think looked the other way?
I think everybody in Minnesota knew about it. There's been so many great local investigative journalistic stories on this. And I think the governor, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, and all of the agency heads have looked the other way.
I really want to salute you and your colleagues that were on the front end of this, trying to get people to pay attention to this. And when you raised attention to this fraud long before Nick Shirley's outstanding reporting, Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison actually refused to take your claim seriously. Isn't that correct?
Yes, we gave them a list in February of last year of 72 child care centers we thought were problematic that should be investigated, and to my knowledge, they didn't do anything with the list we provided.
Now, as an elected official, you obviously are out in the community. Is this blatant fraud something that people on the street are talking about?
All the time. They're furious.
And they know it. It's in plain sight. Everyone knows what's going on, but no one will act.
Well, we're doing our best to act at the committee.
You are, but the people that are actually in power, I come from New York, so I understand what blue state living's all about. It's infuriating because we see the same thing in our home state. And when you have people in power that refuse to do the right thing, even though the problem is an obvious one, it's really disheartening to the constituents and the taxpayers, the hardworking men and women paying the bills. And Representative Robbins, do you think that there was a political calculation that was made by the people that turned a blind eye, that it was more beneficial for them to allow and kind of green light the fraud, or were they afraid of political consequences if they actually did something about that from a constituency of Somalis?
Yes, I think they chose to protect the fraudsters and the criminals over the whistleblowers and the taxpayers because, as the Somali investigator said, that feckless fear, they had feckless fear from the establishment, politicians, and state agencies when they were confronted with charges of racism and Islamophobic. So they were afraid of being called racist or Islamophobic, the Democrat politicians, and standing up to their base. So they just turned a blind eye.
And with this, Somali population, this is part of the Democrat Party's base at this point in Minnesota, isn't that correct?
Largely.
Largely. So they were basically renting a constituency through the fraud at the expense of the taxpayer. That's wild. You don't have to answer that. I think that we all know the answer to that. And Representative Hudson, there is a child care affordability crisis right now, and young families in my district and across the country are making really tough choices to afford quality care. What impact has this fraud had on wait lists and staffing and simply making resources available for legitimate child care centers in your constituency?
Well, as Mr. Finstead pointed out, in Minnesota, there's been a long-standing attack upon family-based childcare, where folks would run businesses out of their homes. And when you're out of the city, that's usually the type of childcare you would have access to. And so in a climate where there's already been reductions in the availability of people to be able to receive childcare, again, going back to the firefighter putting out the fire analogy, yeah, it causes damage with the water, but it's necessary in this time because even though it hurts, because of the blaze that Walz allowed to explode.
It's amazing. This $9 billion in fraud went uninvestigated, ignored, swept aside for years. Not a single rogue bureaucrat, but by every Democrat official in the state of Minnesota who presented with clear, damning evidence chose to look the other way blindly. I cannot wait to see Tim Walz and Keith Ellison in those seats where you're sitting right now. But to everyone here, we cannot ignore who truly benefited from this failure beyond the perpetrators of the fraud. And it's Governor Tim Walz and the entire Democratic leadership throughout a constituency's votes that they bought by looking the other way and letting this happen. They effectively greenlit this theft of billions of dollars in taxpayer money through years of willful ignorance. And every single American taxpayer deserves full accountability, because this isn't limited to just Minnesota. We have a lot of other states to start to look at. I mean, all the big blue handout states. I live in one of them. We have to open the Pandora's box here and find out how much money has been siphoned off from America's taxpayers. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Well said. Chair recognizes Congressman Jack from Georgia.
I also want to echo my support for Congressman Langworthy's remarks. Certainly associate myself with them. It is all political, and it's very unfortunate. I want to thank the witnesses for testifying today. I also like to thank our chairman for convening this hearing so expeditiously. Less than 2 weeks have passed since the nation was caught in this just horrible crisis, watching this unfold, and here we are with action today. We've talked a lot about the $9 billion in fraud. I like quantifying it because, more often than not, we throw around the biggest numbers here in Washington, and sometimes it's hard to quantify it. It takes about a second to count a dollar bill, and that's 9 billion seconds means that if we started counting in 1741, 285 years ago, we would just now be finishing $9 billion worth of accounts. So take that data point to heart. But I want to concentrate my line of questioning today on the whistleblowers. And I know a lot has been discussed, but as we near the end of this hearing, I want to start with Representative rhetoric. And it's our understanding, as has been discussed today, the Department of Human Services whistleblowers claim that they have faced retaliation from senior Minnesota Department of Human Services officials, including appointees, on behalf of Governor Walz. And I just want you to explain to us again how these administrators have retaliated against whistleblowers.
Right. So the threats were pretty intense. And as I've said, their jobs were threatened. They had strange questions demanding answers about where their children went to school, where their bus stops were. They were told that if you don't do what we tell you to do or not do what we tell you to do, you'll lose your job. You'll lose that job with cause, which means in Minnesota that you don't get unemployment insurance. You also could lose your retirement plan. Also, you'd be blacklisted off of all state agencies, and I would note that that also includes Hennepin and Ramsey counties, our biggest counties, because they are Democrat-run, and maybe even the University of Minnesota. I'm going to throw that into probably some of our biggest cities, like Rochester, Duluth, that are very Democrat-leaning. So it's a very vast threat. They've also threatened them with sort of a vague military intelligence. So there was one, I have the email right here that was just submitted, I believe, by Congresswoman Fishbach, and it says things like, I would like to use my former colleagues in the Army to locate where you are using your IP address, and I don't have that. He says, I don't have that technology anymore, but I can get it in a heartbeat. So there were vague threats, and I believe there was more threats beyond that, but it was very expansive threats.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I actually wanted to talk about that. As I understand it, it was and I think it's to your point, she entered it into the record, but the interim Deputy Assistant Commissioner of Operations, for the folks watching at home, the Department of Human Services Minnesota allegedly was trying to use a contact in the military during the Biden administration to track whistleblowers' whereabouts. I presume this is illegal under Minnesota law, but would love for you to indulge us as to whether or not it is.
I don't know for sure if it's illegal in Minnesota. If it's not, it certainly should be. I think most of what happened to the whistleblowers is illegal, but the control over the state, the control over the largest counties, the control over some of our largest cities is controlled by Democrats. And so this was allowed to continue.
And to the best of your knowledge, whether it be Governor Dayton or Governor Pawlenty before, were whistleblowers treated in such a manner under those administrations, or is this unique to the Walz administration?
I don't have any reports, particularly through the Pawlenty administration. I know that fraud was beginning to be uncovered at the very tail end of his administration, but mostly under Democrat rule. But I don't know of this kind of retaliation in any other administration besides the Walz administration.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And I just want to close out. Some Minnesota officials claim they had no knowledge of this fraud, just found out about it, which I think we all know is demonstrably false. But I'm just curious, could you elaborate for this committee on the many ways by which Governor Walz could have been made aware of this? I mean, he certainly was made aware of this, turned a blind eye. I just want to make sure that we understand as a committee the many methods by which he was informed.
So there were a multitude of legislative auditor reports, so much so that I had read into the record what Jim Nobles, the last legislative auditor before Judy Randall, he had been the legislative auditor for 38 years, and he was so disgusted by the actions of Governor Walz that he wrote a couple comments in the Star Tribune saying that they literally just needed to do basic financial controls, and it's behooving to him, or confounding to him, I should say, as to why they didn't. So he is a very much a nonpartisan, non-political person, and he was shocked at what he found.
Well, I want to thank all of our witnesses for testimony today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and I believe our last questioner is our last wave on from Minnesota, Representative Stauber.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And after all the conversations today, you wonder why the Department of Justice can't get the voter rolls out of Minnesota, and the Secretary of Ag can't get the SNAP benefits from Minnesota to make sure there's no fraud. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for holding this hearing, and I also want to thank our witnesses whose years of hard work in Minnesota are exposing these revelations, are finally garnering the national attention that they deserve. And finally, I want to thank the numerous whistleblowers who are exposing Tim Walz's failures as governor. As we have heard today, these brave men and women are risking their careers to reveal the truth, while Tim Walz is actively attempting to threaten and suppress them. I am here to say it won't work, and we stand with the whistleblowers. I want to shift gears and ask you about Minnesota's new paid family leave program that the governor has been touting during this fraud scandal. Representative Rarick, under the paid family leave program in Minnesota, who can I take leave or care for? And is it limited to family or dependents?
Thank you, Congressman Stauber. No, it is not limited to just family. One would think that it was, but there is something that the Democrats built into the law that said if I set up an expectation of care, with no documentation, by the way, no attestation, absolutely no documentation, then that is good enough in Minnesota.
So I could take care of somebody that's just a friend of mine?
Congressman, absolutely.
So it doesn't matter if they're related, if I've had a past relationship or closer, I can just go and ask or tell my employer I'm leaving for 12 weeks or 8 weeks and get 90% of my pay and take care of that person, right?
You could do that, yes. And so it's a sliding scale. It's not all of the people would get 90%, but the vast majority, I believe, depending on your salary, would get 90%. And yes, you could go take care of anybody because there is no documentation.
Well, what kind of proof of care would I have to provide to the state to demonstrate that I am actually taking care of you during my paid family leave?
Yeah, there's absolutely no documentation. So you have to provide and prove absolutely nothing.
So if I don't show up and take care of who I say I'm taking care of, nothing's going to happen to me?
That's correct. You could go to Puerto Rico, you could go to Istanbul. It doesn't matter where you go or what you do. There's no requirement to document.
So I can say that I'm just caring for anyone, and the state of Minnesota would require my boss to give me a 12-week vacation without any proof?
That is exactly how the Democrats wrote that law. That's correct.
Is a licensed American doctor required to certify that this person needs my immediate and uninterrupted care?
So the medical professionals is a very, very broad category, and no, they do not have to be an American midwife, doctor, chiropractor, orthopedic surgeon, none of those things. It can be in any country.
Does the state require the person I'm claiming to care for to be present in Minnesota or even in the United States of America?
No, Congressman, that person could be anywhere.
Somalia?
Absolutely.
So you're telling me I can get a foreign doctor without an American license to just check a box and I get a state-mandated paid vacation to Somalia or any other country. Is that correct?
That is how the law was written by Democrats in Minnesota, yes.
This is incredibly concerning. With what little time I have left, I want to open this up to the entire panel. Is there anything else you would like to address regarding the paid family leave program? And I'll start with Representative Robbins.
Thank you. We always talk about how important it is to stop fraud on the front end. So our committee held a hearing on this paid family leave law that took effect January 1st back in November. And we grilled the Department of Employment and Economic Development, trying to get them to shore up some of these definitions, trying to put some guardrails on this program. And they just assured us over and over, they've got it covered, there won't be any fraud, don't worry about it. But I've already had whistleblower reports since the program started, January 1st, of fraud. So we're gonna have to get a handle on this, and I think it's the next fraud frontier in Minnesota.
Representative Hudson, anything you'd like to add on the paid family leave program in Minnesota?
Just to put the points that Representative Rarick put as concisely as possible, it is humorous but true that you could quite literally have a witch doctor approve your vacation to Somalia. That's how loose the rules are written.
Listen, I'm proud to be from Minnesota. I was born, raised, I'm living in Minnesota, raising my family there. This is going to stop, and you folks are at the front of it. Minnesotans have had enough. We're hardworking people. We will not allow our tax dollars to go to fraud, and I commend the three of you and other folks back in Minnesota that want to stop this. And Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chair, I seek recognition to make a motion for a subpoena.
State your motion.
I would like to make a motion to subpoena the Department of Homeland Security for all documents and footage related to the murder of a woman by ICE that took place in Minneapolis, Minnesota today.
A motion has been made. The committee will hold this motion in abeyance till the end of today's hearing. And we will prepare to close now. That concludes all of our questions. In closing, I want to again thank our witnesses for being here today. Welcome to the House Oversight Committee. This was a pretty cordial committee hearing for us, so and very important. Before we adjourn, I want to yield to Ranking Member Garcia for his closing remarks, and then I will give my closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just before we close, I just also want to mention the news of this horrific killing in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're talking about Minnesota right now. This was a killing by an ICE agent. There are videos that are now online. There's testimony that's being brought to light. It's horrific. I encourage folks to watch those videos and see what's happened for themselves. And I'm hopeful that this committee investigates this incident and that we have full accountability. So I want to thank Representative Presley for her motion. Now, we've heard a lot today, and particularly a lot of bigoted smears against an entire community. Now, some Republican members of this committee said or implied that somehow all Somalis are now suspected fraudsters or terrorists. Now, Somali Americans are overwhelmingly U.S. citizens with the same rights as any member of this committee. And the rest, and a vast majority of them, are just hardworking folks that are trying to take care of their families and playing by the rules. And we should be clear that if we want to investigate fraud, we should start by investigating 1600 Pennsylvania. We all know that fraud is a betrayal of the public's trust, and Democrats agree that we must be rigorous in conducting oversight wherever it exists. But conducting rigorous oversight does not somehow exclude the president or the administration, or the DOJ and what's happening there, or the rampant crimes that are happening right now all across other agencies. We know that holding fraudsters accountable does not mean granting them full and unconditional presidential pardons because they are wealthy supporters of the president. President Trump last year gave out 25 get-out-of-jail-free cards from fraudsters alone, 25. He pardoned them from paying back more than $1 billion they owe to their victims. This is wrong, and it's un-American. We have to make sure that victims of fraud are not forced to suffer anymore. And we also know that cutting off child care and family support for thousands of innocent families is not the way to protect victims. In fact, it punishes victims. These attacks are harming parents, children, and child care providers as we speak. Many child care providers, not just in Minnesota, but across the country, are receiving death threats. Child care centers have been vandalized, and the children's information has been stolen in some cases. Child care providers in states across the country have reported that they will have to close if they lose federal funding. Parents are saying they have to quit their jobs because they will no longer be able to have childcare for their families and while they're at work. These cuts will make it harder for families to put food on the table as grocery costs continue to increase. We should be protecting those families and children who are being hurt by all of this. Let's go after the big fraud in our government, and that includes the fraud and corruption at the White House. And with that, I yield back.
The ranking member yields back, and I will conclude by saying today we have heard about the shocking, rampant, and long ongoing fraud in Minnesota's social service programs. This fraud has shocked and outraged the American people, and rightfully so. The scale of this fraud is not just something we've seen before, and I'm pretty confident this is just the tip of the iceberg. The Trump administration has taken a whole-of-government approach to rooting out fraud. The Trump administration has already uncovered at least $9 billion in fraud. These criminals have stolen taxpayer dollars from all Americans to fund lavish cars, homes, and vacations here in the U.S. and abroad. Some of this stolen money is even allegedly going overseas to support terrorists. Our witnesses, the chairwoman and 2 members of the Minnesota House of Representatives Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Policy Committee, have been sounding the alarm on this fraud for years. Democrats have attempted to distract the American people from this widespread fraud and accuse investigators of racism. This should not be a partisan issue, but they clearly do not take this issue seriously. Either they don't take fraud seriously or they just don't care. It's one or the other. The most vulnerable are suffering as a result. These programs are meant to feed needy kids, provide services to autistic children, house low-income and disabled Americans, and provide health care to vulnerable Medicaid recipients. The Walz administration has kept this money flowing for years, oftentimes behind closed doors. When whistleblowers came forward about this fraud, the Walz administration retaliated against employees who warned and alerted the administration to fraud occurring within these social programs. There's supposed to be checks and balances in our system to prevent this, both on the federal and state levels. Every agency that lost hundreds of millions and even billions of dollars has well-paid staff that are supposed to prevent this. That's their job. They're inspectors general. That's their job. They have huge staffs. We have jurisdiction over the IGs. Many have failed, and they need to be held accountable. Now, I want to close by saying we've had 4 Minnesota Republicans to waive on this committee. If there was a committee hearing about fraud in Kentucky and I wasn't on the committee, I would want to waive on the committee. But not a single Democrat requested to waive on the committee from the state of Minnesota. And there is one member of the Minnesota delegation, Representative Omar, who coincidentally is of Somali descent, did not request to be in this hearing. I will publicly invite her to come to the next hearing. And she doesn't have to, but she can request to be waived on, and I will gladly grant that request. Now, I'm doing this motion, right? I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an application unsealed by the United States District Court for the District of Minnesota on December 18, 2025, for law enforcement to execute a search warrant on Ultimate Home Health Services, LLC, for defrauding Minnesota's Independent Community Supports Medicaid program. This fraudulent provider's negligence resulted in the death of a man who suffered from severe mental health fitness. I referenced this tragedy in my opening statement. This isn't it. This is just the beginning. We want to, again, thank you for being here. We're going to work with you to see that these federal funds go to people in Minnesota who they're supposed to go to. I support President Trump putting a halt on all federal funding to these government social programs in Minnesota until we get a handle on where this is going. And thank you all for doing that. We will work with you and do everything we can to hold people accountable and to stop the fraud and get the backs of the American taxpayers. Pursuant to the previous order, the chair declares the committee in recess subject to the call of the chair. We plan to reconvene at 4 p.m. The committee now stands in recess, and the witnesses may be excused. Thank you all.
By the way, I was watching BT. What's the best way? 612. You another 3-4 hours. I'm like, I'll believe it when I see it. Yeah, he's already communicated. What last I heard, I know they're coming back to us live. He's having Justin to come relieve him.
Do you think that 4 minutes is sufficient? Yeah.